This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And we are trying to get back into the swing of things. Randall's been busy. Randall, you've been going around giving presentations in a few different places. And we've got trips that we've been going on, trips that are coming up. But yeah, we are trying to get back into doing at least one podcast or live stream a week. So here we are. This is episode 99. Is that right?
99.
Yeah.
Cool.
Wow.
99.
We have plans for 100. You gonna get dressed up?
We better make plans.
Yeah.
I don't think we should just let 100 come and go with no particular notice or nothing special.
Do you live in a cave now?
I know I've thrown out toga multiple times.
Toga, yeah.
Beyond that, I'm gonna have to define a little
I'll make a
clarity.
special graphic that uses my backdrop.
There you go. Put a UFO back there. That'll be your special graphic. Yeah, with Snake Bros, we just waited till 200. We went right past 100 without doing anything.
You just breezed right by it?
Yeah, and then we got to 200. We're like, maybe we should do something. So, but yeah, we ought to do something. But this is great. I can't believe we're at 99 already. So it's fantastic.
We're coming up on
is.
4 years, so we're gonna have to pick up the pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you know, it's true. We've been neglectful, but it's all because I think most of us have been traveling a lot.
Yeah. Brad just got home, right?
Brad
An extended
especially.
trip.
Yeah, I had a long road trip. Just got home middle of the night 2 nights ago. So yeah, I'm still unwinding a bit, but totally
Brad
worthwhile and setting up some new ideas for tours.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like he was in a cave. Yeah.
Well, this is kind of what the rocks look like out in Utah and Arizona, where I've been tooling around. Last place I stopped was Colorado National Monument on the way through Grand Junction and then 70 cross country. So yeah, this is what the rocks look like. A lot of places out there.
So you did a recon for a potential Bonneville flood trip.
Definitely would like to try to pull that off in 2024. There's as usual, more places than we're going to get to in a 5 or 6 day tour, but yeah, somewhere I think we'd start off in Salt Lake City and check out the side of Lake Bonneville itself, go across the Snake River Plain, and then end up in Boise.
Mm-hmm. So you went up through Red Rock Pass, I assume, when you made your recon. You were in Salt Lake City?
Definitely went out to Antelope Island, went up through Red Rock Pass, went up through Pocatello and the narrow zigzag stretch where the floodwaters rushed through before they made the big fan out there in Pocatello and American Falls.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Mallet Gorge and, just many sites. It's a beautiful, unique area. The interstate actually goes down into the canyon for a couple miles, so it's really just an impressive drive across Interstate 84.
So you did the falls. You go to the Perrine Bridge.
Did go to the Perrine Bridge. Yep, definitely. They got a big new walkway and visitor center there. So both sides of the bridge, lots of overlooks there, and they're actually doing base jumping. A guy approached us to see if we wanted to do base jumping with them.
We're gonna put that on the tour. We should put that on the tour. We should put that on the tour. Base jumping.
Yeah,
Like, that's the only way to see the canyon, is to jump off the top of it, fall down into it.
yeah, it's pretty expensive, but when we drove by a couple days later, we saw somebody actually up on the rail and jump off right as we were driving by on the bridge.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Crazy.
Wow.
It's about 450 feet deep there, I think, at Twin Falls. But I went to Shoshone Falls, and it was more volume than we've ever seen because, again, I've gone in the spring, right? We've always gone in the late summer, and everything's dry. Just a trickle out there, but it was gushing, so that was beautiful.
I've got to see that.
Places that we did on a tour.
Yeah, all right. But you didn't do the Bruno Dunes, right?
did get out to the
Oh, you
Bruno
did?
Dunes.
That's right.
Didn't get to Bruno Canyon.
Okay.
It's super windy out there a lot of the time, and that's their reasoning for how that 400-foot high plus tallest dunes in the country or the continent even have collected in that semicircular basin there. But they're actually renting little sandboards that you can, like board down the dunes on. So we saw some people doing that. So watch that. But yeah, it's like you're getting
That sounds like
sandblasted
a
out
lot.
there.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yep. So
We're both snowboarders,
They've got
so
an
we'd try that.
observatory and a new observatory out there. So yeah, we started talking to the woman at the visitor center about setting up a program where we could come, during the day and then stay at night and get a professionally run observatory view of the sky.
That'd be great. That'd be a nice little bonus to include in a tour, absolutely. And then you guys got up to the bottom end of Hell's Canyon. Is that what you told me? You got
yeah, we went to the end of the road. As far as you can go, you get to the Hell's Canyon Dam, and you can get a little beyond it, and then that's where the put-in is for the jet boat tours. And again, that was just rushing, gushing like crazy. It was just so much volume coming out. They're releasing through the dam.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, so they're just starting into the season where they'll take people several hours downriver into the canyon beyond where you can drive, and then you jet boat back up, however many miles it is. I didn't get the details on that, but yeah, it's a early morning excursion and spend a lot of the day doing that. So that would be probably a bonus, like 2-day add-on to the trip, because it's over 3.5 hours just to drive down in there.
Yeah.
One way, and then you have to come back out the other way.
So then they do have boat tours, though, to take you through the whole canyon. Like, take multiple days up to like Lewiston or Clarkston. Do they go do that?
I don't think they go that far.
Okay.
But there's lots of rafting trips and water companies. We went through a town called Riggins on the Idaho side. That's pretty much parallel to the canyon, and there's a bunch of whitewater rafting. The Salmon River goes through there, and there's access into Hell's Canyon, so they do multi-night rafting trips, etc. But I don't know about.
Three, two. This is live, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a very unusual podcast we're going to have here, and a very unusual discussion. I have to my left Michael Shermer, very famous skeptic. He's been on the podcast before. Of course, Randall Carlson, amazing gentleman who knows far too much about terrifying things like asteroids. And Graham Hancock, author, also fantastic human being, many times been on this podcast as well. And this all came out of a podcast that Randall and Graham and I did recently, and Michael Shermer commented on it, and it was all essentially on the hypothesis that the great extinction that happened with the North American land animals that happened somewhere around the end of the Ice Age, and the end of the Ice Age, the abrupt end of the Ice Age, being caused, please correct me if I fuck any of this up, being caused by a comet impact. Michael Shermer had some questions about that, and we said this would be an amazing podcast to get everybody together in a room and go over this. Since then, there's been some interesting stuff that's happened. Well, I thought this was really fascinating that Forbes has a mainstream article in Forbes, did a comet wipe out Ice Age megafauna? And this is actually from just a couple of weeks ago. And then there was also this interpretation that's fairly recent as well about one of the stone tablets, one of the stone carvings rather, on Göbekli Tepe. And Graham, you would probably be the best to describe that.
Yeah, that was published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, peer-reviewed journal, by a couple of scientists from the University of Edinburgh. And they are proposing an interpretation of the Göbekli Tepe imagery. There's quite a lot of imagery on those T-shaped pillars, particularly one pillar, pillar 43 in enclosure D. And their deduction, what they take from their interpretation, of course many will disagree with them, their interpretation is that those images are speaking of the comet impact. They're speaking of a comet that hit the Earth roughly 12,900 years before our time.
And Randall, this has been something that you've been obsessed with for many, many years now. We've documented it and detailed it in many conversations that we've had on the podcast.
Oh, yes. Now, I can't say that I'm that familiar with that article. I haven't had a chance to get into it. So
But this idea that the comet impact is what has caused the end of the Ice Age.
Well, it's so complex, but now what we do is we throw some type of an impact into the mix, and it seems to fill gaps
Pull this right up to you.
It seems to fill gaps that were, at this point, still unexplained. There's varying theories between some extent of climate change and some extent of human predation that caused the extinction. And I've always felt like you can't blame it on one or the other. I think humans probably had a role, but only in the very final stages of the extinction event. And one of the scenarios would certainly suggest that there were extreme climate changes between what's called the Balling-Alarod, which was the rather gradual warming at the very end of the Pleistocene, which was then followed by the Younger Dryas, which was the return to full glacial cold, and then the end of the Younger Dryas, which is dated at about 11,600, which is considered now to be the boundary of the Holocene. Post Younger Dryas, pre-boreal it's called, would be the beginning of the Holocene. And it seems that most of the extinctions did occur between roughly 13,000 and 11,600 years ago, although the dating has a wide spread on it, so you can't pinpoint it down to a specific event. But I've always felt like that there had to be something we needed to look at that triggered the extreme climate changes that we do see at the end of the Ice Age. And to my opinion, you can't attribute that solely to Milankovitch theories, which is basically the changing solar terrestrial geometries, because they're too slow. And what we see at the end of the Ice Age were very rapid climate changes. And so one of the things that I think has been missing has been the trigger. Wallace Brecker pointed out years ago that possibly a major flood from the draining of Lake Agassiz caused an interruption of the thermohaline circulation, which is basically the circulation of the North Atlantic Ocean, and that this might have been what triggered the Younger Dryas and then also contributed to the mass extinction events. But now I think that the dating of the draining of Lake Agassiz is too late for that, and was probably a latter event within the overall melting phenomena that occurred between roughly 14,600 and about 11,000 years ago. Somewhere in there we have to fit that mass extinction event, and I definitely have thought that climate change was the dominant factor in that. But then what triggered the climate change? That always seemed to me to be something that was not ever really explained. The comet impact theory is very controversial, but the evidence has been steadily mounting now for a decade.
Including physical evidence, right? Like the core samples that show nuclear glass scattered out throughout Asia and Europe at roughly the same time period when they do the core samples?
Yes, most of it's dating to 12,800 to 13,000 years ago.
These are called impact proxies.
Yeah.
Impact proxies.
Nanodiamonds, melt glass, microspherules. These kind of things are associated with impact, not necessarily always caused by impact. So this has been part of the reason for the controversy, but it's the abundance of all of these at a particular level which leads a large group of scientists to feel that we have had a comet impact in the past.
It's the full assemblage of things that is difficult to explain by processes without invoking some type of a cosmic event.
And it also corresponds with what you believe is a period where Earth travels through a series of comets.
Well, this gets us to the ideas of the what would be called the British neocatastrophists, Victor Klube and William Napier and a number of others that have theorized that from time to time Earth encounters the debris from a large disintegrating comet. And there's an interesting William Napier addresses this in an interesting article I can pull up here pretty soon, that possibly around 13,000 years ago, Earth may have encountered some of the debris from a disintegrating comet, which ultimately goes back to Fred Whitman, who is one of the godfathers of cometary science.
Could I just come in on that for a second? I mean, specifically, Bill Napier, Victor Klube are identifying the remnants of this comet with the Tauride meteor stream, which is familiar, I think, to everybody. We pass through it twice a year. We see meteorites, particularly at the end of October, early November. That debris stream is still there. It still contains, according to their argument, bits of the comet. There are large objects in it, like Comet Encke, Rudnicki, Oggiato, and so on, 4 or 5 kilometers in diameter. And the suggestion is that the meteor stream has got lots of small bits of dust, but it's got some larger stuff too, and some of that stuff fell out of the meteor stream 12,800 years ago and impacted primarily the North American ice cap.
Now, Michael, when you listened to that podcast, you had some questions. You are a professional skeptic, so of course you were skeptical. What are your thoughts about all this?
Yeah, let me pull back and give a bigger picture. After the podcast, I went and got the book, Magicians of the Gods, and actually I listened to it on audio. So it's, I don't know, like 16, 18 hours of Graham reading with his wonderful British accent, which is, for Americans, that elevates the quality of the argument by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, that's how they sell things in infomercials over here.
And Graham, you're a good writer. It's a very compelling story.
Thank you. You're a great skeptic.
And so I think, a number of points about, in general, the idea of alternative archaeology, which is really what we're talking about here. I prefer that to pseudo-archaeology because that's a little bit of it. It's supposed to be a little bit of an insult. So alternative archaeology, so it's good to remember that, so you have these guys on the podcast for 3 or 4 hours, and the audience listening thinks, yeah, why don't these guys get a fair hearing? I mean, it's like there's the mainstream and then there's these guys.
Right.
But there isn't just these guys. There's hundreds of alternative archaeological theories. So which one gets the play, which one gets attention, which one doesn't? And for a mainstream archaeologist who's busy in the field and trying to get grants and so on, they mostly just don't have the time to sort through all these alternative theories, because this is just one. And as we'll see in the next couple hours, there's hundreds and hundreds of things to be addressed. So that's kind of what we do. So just to rattle off a few: the lost tribes of Israel who colonized the Americas, Mormon archaeology, explanation of Native Americans, the Kensington runestones in Minnesota that the Vikings had come here, the Black Egyptian hypothesis. When I was in graduate school, this book called Black Athena was published, that the Egyptians were actually black, and that the sort of Western white male dominance of history had written them out of the past. So this was a whole alternative history, alternative archaeology. Piltdown Man, Thor Heyerdahl, in his hypothesis that the Polynesian islands were colonized by South Americans who went east to west. That's since been debunked, but that's yet another one of these things. South American archaeology, Olmec statues seem to have like African features on them. So maybe Africans went directly across to South America. So there's, Eric Van Doniken, Zechariah Sitchin. Now, most of these Graham rejects in his book, to your credit. So you're a good skeptic too. But for an outsider, to an anthropologist from Mars who steps into this thing cold, doesn't know anything, it's like, well, they're all alternative. Which is the right one? And how do we know? And so the way it works in science is the default position is the skeptical position. We assume your hypothesis is not true, not just you, anybody's hypothesis, like the Klube-Napier hypothesis. That was widely published. It was widely covered in mainstream scientific journals and popular science magazines like Scientific American. And it has not fared that well over the last decade or so. It's still around. It's still debated, but so you put it in the mainstream through peer-reviewed journals, and then you go to conferences and you have it out, and that's kind of where we end up with, well, this is what we think is probably true for now, and then all these other people out here, if they don't jump into the pool where everybody is, then there's no way for an outsider to know whether these alternative things have any validity or not, other than they make a compelling case in a popular book, yes, but what do the mainstream scientists think? So, and the problem is that, so a couple of specific things, like what I call patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise, the Virgin Mary on a grilled cheese sandwich or whatever. Mm-hmm. Those are fun examples, but you know, taking pictoglyphs and then comparing them to constellations. Like here we have some constellations on your roof here. It's easy in the mind's eye to find a pattern. The question is, did those people really think 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years? So this is a field called archaeoastronomy. Ed Krupp, the director of the Griffith Observatory.
All right, we're warm now.
This is what he does.
We are
And
warm.
sometimes the pattern, he thinks the patterns mean something.
That was a
Sometimes they're
rough
totally random.
warming up period.
Or you take something like the pyramids. You know, as Graham knows, there's 100 theories about the pyramids, and there's the mainstream one, and then there's all these other ones. And this is why people like the director there, he just can't deal with them all. So just as one example I used in my book, White People Believe Weird Things, that one guy calculated
so
that if you
fast.
divide the height of the pyramid into twice the side of the base, you get the number close to pi. And then he just sort of works all these different numbers, so therefore it's cosmically significant.
Well, Richard Hoagland was like the best example of that,
Yes,
right? He would
Hoagland.
find these patterns in Mars and claim that like if you go from this rock to half the distance and
Right.
why would you do that? Like
Right.
that doesn't make any sense. He would create these patterns.
Right, and that's okay. I mean,
To make his case.
all scientists look for patterns. So, like, just take climate change. Either the Earth is getting warmer, or it's not. Either it's human caused or it's not. There's a pattern in the data. You can see the pattern. The question is the pattern real? So this is why we use the term climate consensus. It's not a democracy. It's not like we voted on it and decided this is the truth. It's that independently, all these different scientists working in different fields, publishing in different journals, come to the same conclusion. So we call this consilient science or convergence of evidence science. That it's not like these guys are meeting on the weekends going, boy, we got to combat those crazy right-wingers with our data. They're independently coming to these conclusions. So that lifts our confidence that, yeah, there's probably something to their theory. Such that there's now so much data converging to this, you'd have to deconstruct every one of those independent lines. So then you have things like what I call the problem of the residue of anomalies. In any field, there are a residue of anomalies we can't explain. So like UFOs, for example. Ufologists, and me, a skeptic, agree that 90 to 95% of all the UFO sightings are explained by natural phenomena. Venus, swamp gas, airplanes, geese, whatever. They know that. And so we're really only talking about 5%. Like, how do you explain that one right there in 1967 on June 3rd? I don't know. No one knows that one. And then from there they build, well, that's my case.
Right.
If you can't explain that, then I have a case. No.
Well, that's very different than what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
though,
how
right?
is that, how is that
actually,
relevant
no,
to us here?
It's totally relevant because I think almost all of your argument is based on this residue of anomalies, what we call the God of the gaps argument. If you scientists can't explain, this particular rock right here or that particular petroglyph, then I'm going to count that toward my compilation of data to support my hypothesis of a lost civilization.
But no one is saying that the scientists can't explain it. What essentially, particularly Randall with his series of images has shown, is that what you have here is something that can be explained by rapid melting of the ice caps. And Randall, step in if you will.
Well,
Okay, go ahead if you want.
Well, they do say, I mean, it depends what you mean by rapid. A glacial dam that, as our geologists will tell us in a moment, that breaks, that's fairly rapid.
Mm-hmm.
Back in '96, there was a very popular book called The Noah's Flood. This was a serious book by two geologists that said it was the rapid filling up of the Black Sea that swamped over the civilizations living on the edges of this, and that's where the Noachian flood story comes from. Okay, so it was widely debated and so on, and since it hasn't fared that well. But that's fairly rapid. I mean, we're talking over the course of weeks or months or years. To a geologist, thousands of years is rapid.
Mm-hmm.
So, an impact by a comet, it happens in a couple hours or a couple of days or weeks versus a couple of months or years. What do we mean by rapid?
Okay, well, what are you saying then?
Okay.
So what are you saying about their theories in particular?
Okay, so the problem, I think, Graham, the deepest problem is much of your theory depends on negative evidence. That is, I don't accept the mainstream explanation for the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Machu Picchu, whatever.
Well, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about this specific subject because it's going to take a long time just to cover
Okay, all right. So I'll just
asteroidal
hit
impacts.
all right. So my final point is the falsifiability one. That is, what would it take to refute your hypothesis? Like, for me, the answer would be, like, if Göbekli Tepe turned out to be what you think it might have been, the place where advanced ancient civilization once inhabited, or they used it. Where are the metal tools? Where are the writing, the examples of writing?
Perhaps a decision was made not to use metal. Perhaps a decision was made that errors had taken place, that in reinventing civilization we shouldn't perhaps go down quite the same route as before. Perhaps writing isn't always an advance. Perhaps an oral tradition which records in memory, which enhances and uses the power of memory, may be a very effective way of dealing with information. We regard writing as an advance, and I can see lots of reasons why it is an advance, but if we put ourselves into the heads of ancient peoples, maybe it wasn't. I mean, there's a tradition from ancient Egypt that the god Thoth, god of wisdom, was the inventor of writing, but we have a text in which he is questioned by a pharaoh who is saying, well, actually, have you really done a good thing by introducing writing? Because then the words may roam around the world without wise advice to put them into context, and what will happen to memory when people so there might be a choice not to go that way.
All right, but then what do you mean by advanced? When you say there used to be a lost advanced civilization before 10,000 years ago.
Well, let's just pause here for a second, because what we know for a fact is that the carbon dating in all the area around Göbekli Tepe is somewhere around 12,000 years. Is that correct?
11,600 years ago is
so
the earliest they found so far. But a great deal of Göbekli Tepe is still underground.
Right, so at least what we know is someone built some pretty impressive structures 11,600 years ago.
7,000 years before Stonehenge.
So when that story broke, this is long before you came along with your book, it was controversial in the sense that we thought hunter-gatherers could not do something like this because to do that you need a large population with a division of labor and so forth. And so what the response to archaeologists was, well, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers. Maybe they can do more stuff than we gave them credit for. So why is that not a reasonable hypothesis versus it was actually advanced, but we mean something completely different by advanced, not writing and metal and technology. We mean, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we have a body of archaeology which goes on for decades, which is saying that megalithic sites, for example, Gigantea in Malta or Hagareeb or Menidra, megalithic sites date to no older than 5,500 to 6,000 years old. Gigantea would push it close to 6,000 years old. And
yo, what up, Toad? How you doing, broski? I was literally just like, not like no homo, nothing wrong with being homosexual. I was literally just thinking about you, man.
Years older than Stonehenge. Incredibly sophisticated site.
Like
very
literally,
large scale.
what was I thinking about?
Sadly, he's passed away. I spent 3 days working the site with him. He was
I
very
was thinking
generous
like
to me. He showed
exactly
me a lot. He
about
talked to me
you.
a lot.
That's what's up, man.
And he said basically 50 times as much as they've already excavated is still under the ground, that there's hundreds and hundreds of giant stone pillars that they've identified with ground penetrating.
How are you, man? How are you doing, dude?
If they're ever
It's a
going
full
to excavate
moon.
them. But by all
Pisces
accounts,
full
we are
moon.
looking, if we take what's
We're
still
all
under the
feeling
ground
kinda
into account, we're
fucked.
looking at the largest
How are
megalithic
you,
site
man?
that's ever been created on Earth. And it pops up 11,600 years ago with no obvious background to it.
I'm
It just
warmed up.
comes
Well,
out of nowhere. Now,
that
to
we
me,
know
that's
of.
rather well that we know of. But to me, that's immediately
turn
a rather
down
puzzling and
the-
interesting
the
situation. And I would be
podcast alternative.
remiss as an author and an inquirer
down.
into these matters if I didn't take great interest in that. The sudden appearance,
happened
7,000 years
here?
before Stonehenge, of a megalithic site that dwarfs Stonehenge. To me, that's a mystery, and it's really worth inquiring into.
We
Well,
love the
to put it
mystery.
into perspective, that's more than 2,000 years older than what we now consider to be
Jesus
the
Christ.
building of the Great Pyramid
Oh,
of
this
Giza.
is energetic,
in
yeah.
comparison to us to
This
them.
is a Pisces,
So
but it's also
between our time
a
now and
Mercury
2017
retrograde,
and the
right?
construction of the Great Pyramid, you're talking about 2,000
So
years
it's
earlier
like
than that. And
Mercury's
that
going
is
backwards, so the
unbelievable when you're
communications
talking
all
about
fucked.
7,000 years before what we thought
We're
people
super
were doing.
lethargic.
Okay, but my point was that instead of, before we go down the road of constructing a lost civilization that was super advanced but different from our idea of advanced, why not just attribute to these fully modern hunter-gatherers who had the same size brains we have and so on, that they were able to figure out and do this? We just estimated their abilities.
But why did archaeologists tell us for so long hunter-gatherers couldn't do it, and we needed agricultural
because
populations
they
that
didn't.
could generate
Well,
surpluses that could pay for the
yes,
specialists
that was
to...
the theory. But that was so now what archaeologists are saying was, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers.
Well, they might be wrong about hunter-gatherers, or there might be another civilization that they had not
I was having like an
discovered that
existential
been
crisis
unearthed.
today in my
That's what-
mind.
Sorry,
We're talking
Michael,
about so much time.
lost civilizations are not such an extraordinary idea. I mean, nobody knew that the Indus Valley civilization existed at all until some railway work was done around
My
Mohenjo-daro
birth
in
moon is a
1923.
Pisces moon.
Suddenly, a whole civilization pops up out of the woodwork that's just never been taken into account before
love
the
the
1920s.
drugs.
We still can't read its script. You know, the idea that we come across that another turn of the spade reveals information that causes us to reconsider not just was it hunter-gatherers or agriculturalists, but perhaps something bigger than this.
So I'm
is
actually a very
involved.
shy
That's-
person.
That's not such an extraordinary
it sounds
idea.
ridiculous.
I get it that mainstream archaeology doesn't want to go there, but that's my job.
No,
to go there.
I don't think that's correct. They would be happy to go there if there's evidence for it. By what you just said,
You're very
they now
nervous.
fully accept the Indus Valley civilizations. How did that happen if they were dogmatically closed-minded?
Force extroverted.
I don't say that they were
Yeah.
dogmatically closed-minded about that. The evidence, the massive amount of evidence that came up with the discovery of Mohenjo-daro,
But it's interesting
Harappa,
'cause,
Calavera,
like,
and other such sites, it's very difficult,
I'm,
really completely stupid to,
I'm
to,
a
to say
living
that that's not a civilization.
oxymoron.
Göbekli Tepe
I'm a
is bit
living,
more
what's the
nuanced,
word?
You know, we have
Yin
stone,
and
we
yang.
have stone circles. We have some interesting
It's my-
astronomical
my-
alignments. The world's first perfectly
My sun,
north-south
right? My
aligned building.
sun
Maybe.
No, definitely.
Again,
sign
that's a
is all
patternistic thing.
about
Well, I'm citing
fucking
Klaus Schmidt.
attention and
Well, that's all right, but any of us who
fucking-
read back into history 10,000
And my
years ago, what
rising
we're
is
thinking, that they
Sagittarius
might
is
have been
fucking
thinking, that's always
talking.
dangerous for anybody.
This is all about like
Just you,
being
all
in
those-
That's a
the
good point.
spotlight
Klaus
of
Schmidt?
talking.
Klaus Schmidt was the original excavator of Göbekli Tepe. He was the head
feel
of the German
very,
Archaeological Institute, DIG, at Göbekli Tepe. He kindly spent 3 days
Like, I
showing
wanna be,
me,
like, kind of reclusive.
around the site. And really nobody's disputing the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe. They weren't particularly interesting to Klaus Schmidt, but they're there.
And what is the alignment? Like, how is it established?
Well, when you have a perfectly north-south aligned structure, perfectly north-south, a true north, not
Apparently,
then you are dealing with astronomy by definition.
one of
And
my
there are
big
other
issues
alignments of the
is
stone
True
circles to
north
do
once
as
I get, like,
established today,
validation in
or with
something,
the precession of the
I
equinox.
tend to
north is all
disappear,
wrong.
which is really
Okay.
It's
bad.
the rotation axis of our
It's a very bad
Okay,
thing.
so it to this day, it
So I
points
work very
exactly
hard
the
to
same
get
place where it was
validation in
pointing.
something,
always
and then
points
once
to
it's
true north.
received,
But back to this, they
I,
don't
like,
want to go.
stop
Sure,
trying.
they want to go there. They would be happy to go there. Case
Maybe
in
that's
point, 2
everybody,
weeks
but
ago in the
I don't think
journal
it is
Nature,
everybody.
most
That's
prestigious
just kinda
scientific
really
journal in the world, there was published an article
my
that
astrology.
humans or maybe Neanderthals lived in San Diego area 130,000 years ago. This is an order of magnitude older than the Clovis date.
This
so
was the
13,000.
mastodon bones they found that were
Mastodon
smashed.
bones, yeah.
They
So,
believe.
so here's an example of how, okay, so clearly there's not some conspiracy to keep alternative people or fringe or radical theories out.
Yeah, man.
It was published in
I
peer
can
review.
see a lot of people committing suicide, like,
And then what happened?
today or tomorrow.
Hasn't there been a massive reaction
Really,
to that? And
check on your
lots of,
friends,
lots
like,
of
today.
scathing remarks by
Lots
other
of
Tomorrow.
academics.
and
Yes.
that's
Things are
normal.
silent.
That's how
Yes.
science works.
Right now.
You get pushed back. You got to have a thick skin. It's just the way it goes.
You got to have a thick skin, that's for sure. But maybe sometimes your skin is so thick that you just can't sense anything around
Well,
you.
of course, we
Yeah,
don't want that
like-
either. I
So
mean,
what
we
do
want-
you
Like,
think
the
is going
sky,
on when you look at something
the
like Göbekli
astrological
Tepe that's
sky is
covered
definitely
up purposefully, right?
it's like
Yeah, yeah, it's
suicide
deliberately
right
buried.
now.
Again, I
Not
cite
for
Klaus
me.
Schmidt. He's the
But I mean,
authority on this.
fucking-
He's the excavator. He absolutely
It's really bad,
adamantly
man. We gotta
insists that
like,
that site was deliberately buried and finally covered with a hill, which is what Göbekli Tepe means in the Turkish language, pot-bellied hill.
maybe I'm
Yeah.
just
And
making
then
it all
you're
up.
talking
Or
about
just
something. Give me
making
the
it up,
perspective
but
of how large they believe it is currently.
That's
as
the
of
feeling.
Current.
What's excavated at
The
the
end of
moment
life.
is on a scale of Stonehenge.
You
What's
can't
under
say
the
that
ground
word.
may be as much as 50 times larger.
Jesus.
But
Well,
Göbekli
what's interesting
Tepe,
with
there-
like the Pisces
no one
moon
lived
is
there,
it's the
there's
end
no
of the
tools,
zodiac,
there's
right?
no-
So it's like
Well, you're
the
talking
end
about
of the life of
12,000
existence.
They don't even have
old,
pot,
though.
but if it's
It's-
buried,
and
it should
it's
be,
like
there should be
suicide
pottery,
is,
there's no pottery,
is
no
pretty
writing,
much
articles
the-
of clothing, no one
the
lived there.
Well, you're saying
the
nobody lived there,
conscious
so why should
awareness
there
of the
pottery? Why
end
should
of your
pottery
life
be in
of
the fill?
existence.
But-
Why would
how
they go?
about-
Why they go along and break some pots and
And-
stick it in the artificial
how
fill?
about
This would be
something? They're
times
trash
zero.
when they something that would indicate it's different, a different kind of people than what we're used
Especially
to
with the
seeing
Pisces
in
moon
the
getting to
archaeological
the
record.
fucking
In other words,
Well, it's just
Psychic,
rubbish that they
spiritual
poured in.
shit.
It's just stones and earth, buckets
Can't
of
see
it.
that
in
word,
other words,
so
Graham,
passing away.
you to
Self
gain
passing
support
away.
for your theory amongst mainstream
Yes.
archaeologists, they want to see
He-
positive evidence to overturn
Well
the old
said.
theory. In other words, the burden of proof is on the person challenging the mainstream.
I completely agree.
In every field.
But isn't there some proof that the mainstream idea of
God,
these hunters and
how's
gatherers
Nile, man? How's
never
Nile
had
doing?
anything in
Not
what
to
the
bring
theory
up,
was
I don't want to bring
that would indicate these people were
shit
capable
public,
of building
but I know
something
you're saying
remotely
Nile had,
the size of Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, to me, that's the stunning.
had some
beauty of
hand
this find.
issues.
It overturns our
Arm
ideas of
issues.
primitive hunter-gatherers
Has
that could
like
not do
surgery or
this.
some
Apparently, they
shit?
can.
That's one
this is-
possible
Yeah, that's
assessment.
right. So this, I call this, what somebody else called the bigotry of low expectations. You know, it's like we had this kind of low expectations for these hunter-gatherers. Maybe we should jettison that idea.
Or
And in my own
Viathex.
other field of the history of religion, it also threw that off because this apparently was a kind of a spiritual religious. That's the wrong word.
Yeah,
Actually,
man.
nobody can know that.
That's
Probably
right.
working.
But if it
This
was,
is the-
the big National
this is the high
Geographic
season,
article
right?
emphasized that. Maybe this is the
For
very
work,
first
Graham?
religious spiritual temple ever built because they didn't live there, so they went there for a reason.
Isn't it also possible
he's
that
probably
this
just
is
enjoying the
signs that
sun, hopefully.
civilization was more advanced 12,000 years ago than
on
we
the
thought?
on the golf course.
Okay, more advanced. What do we mean by
We're
advanced?
talking about the ability to construct an amazing
I wish-
structure.
Well, okay.
How big was it? Like how tall were these
With
stone?
Some of them are 20 feet tall.
Yeah, but-
some
but-
of them are smaller with astronomical alignments. Klaus Schmidt called it a center of innovation. He was intrigued by the way that agriculture emerges around Göbekli Tepe at the same time that Göbekli Tepe is created. I mean, he went on record with me, perhaps he's not right, but he went on record with me as saying that was the first agriculture. These were the people who invented agriculture. Now, to me, the notion that a group of hunter-gatherers wake up one morning and invent megalithic architecture, the world's largest megalithic site, and at the same moment invent agriculture, stretches credulity a bit. And I think I would prefer to propose, and I have proposed, that what we're looking at is evidence of some kind of transfer of technology, that people came into that area who had other knowledge, and that was applied, and perhaps they mobilized the local population around this site. Perhaps that's precisely why we see agriculture developing there. So perhaps that's the skill that's being passed on.
But I don't see anything particularly. Okay, the stone work is spectacular, but that's not any more advanced than a few
Holy
centuries,
shit.
millennium afterwards.
But
where
you're
they're-
talking about
they're-
something
Spinal
20 feet
surgery,
tall
are you
made of
serious?
stone
but we know
by
a couple
people that were
But a
hunter-gatherers?
couple hundred people can move multi-ton stones.
There's no mystery in moving the stones. They're
That's
still
right,
moving
right.
20-ton stones in Indonesia today.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
megalithic culture still exists.
Right.
You also know that the carving on the outside is extremely complex. It's three-dimensional carving.
Okay, but
Hope
I
he's
mean,
doing
you know
okay,
that
man.
means.
But
do you know what that means?
But Lascaux at 30,000 years ago has magnificent cave paintings with
Right,
three-dimensional
but that's
animals.
but that's painting. You know
Well,
that they.
but there's
you know, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying when I say three-dimensional carvings?
Yeah, like the Venus. The
No, the
Milo.
carvings were on the outside, meaning they didn't carve them into the rock. They carved away the rock
Right,
around them,
right.
which is pretty sophisticated stuff for hunter-gatherers. And they're doing this on these 20-foot tall stone columns. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff.
Okay, but there the assumption is that
You
they
know all
couldn't have
about
figured
that,
this
my
out.
dude.
We know from modern societies where,
That's so
say,
terrible, man.
Australian Aborigines, in one generation, they go from stone tools to flying airplanes. The brains are
No
quite capable
way.
of doing these amazing things.
Did
It's
they
the
go
same
from,
brain.
did
Yeah,
they
but
go
wait a
from
minute, they didn't invent
stone
them.
tools
No,
to
no,
flying
but-
airplanes without somebody introducing them to
Exactly.
airplanes?
Yeah, you're actually making his argument for him.
No. It's not that much of a reach to carve stone. People have been carving stones
But
for
the
thousands
entire
of years.
archaeological opinion on megalithic sites for decades before
Yeah,
this
man, we
was
gotta lift
precisely that it
people up,
was
man.
beyond their ability to
Right,
do that.
and now
We gotta lift
the
others
mainstream
up
has
even in
changed
this
its
Okay,
mind
but
about
let's-
this.
insane
let's-
hard
Or at the very
times,
least,
man.
A
they
little
said-
shift.
I
Let's
think this
pause
is
for
what
a
we're,
moment.
like,
Let's pause for a
we're
moment. So,
learning.
for sure, we all agree human beings made this.
Yes, not
Yes.
aliens.
Okay.
Even
So
he
the
rejects
argument,
the aliens.
Jesus
so the
Christ,
argument
I
is
do.
not whether or not
You-
aliens made it.
yeah,
the
man,
argument
you had
is whether
that
or
shit,
not
man.
humans made it that were
Yeah, that
sophisticated.
shit.
Well, they're clearly sophisticated enough to make this incredible structure that is some
Man, just
sign
standing up and
of
grabbing
some
my
sort of
ankles,
civilization.
stretching.
I believe so.
It is.
Helps
It's a
so much.
gigantic
Here I
structure.
agree with
And,
Graham. that we've again undersold who these people were. My friend Jared Diamond
What's
goes
it called?
to Papua New Guinea.
The
He
power
talks
tower,
in the opening chapter of Guns, Germs,
just
and Steel,
hanging.
how smart these people are that live out there in nature and what it takes to survive.
Oh,
But
sure.
he wouldn't last an hour from L.A., he wouldn't last an hour with his Papua New Guinea friends out there in the wild.
Well, that's just because he doesn't know how to survive, and they've been passing down the information for generation after generation.
Very smart. Okay, so it's not it's not a problem of intelligence. And is there? Okay, so here's the other thing we don't know is that there might be lots more of these sites, and where there's
there are. I visited one of them, Karahan Tepe. You've got the T-shaped pillars sticking out the side of a hill in a farmer's backyard. I mean, I think we're actually at the beginning of opening up this inquiry, not at the end of it by any means.
But then before you, okay, why not just say we don't know? This is a spectacular mystery and leave it at that. Why write a book that says
you guys
I'm going to fill in all the gaps?
You guys on the mainstream side
I'm
won't
tired of
speculate
Clown
and
World,
won't
man.
explore. I don't claim to be an archaeologist.
Can't
I'm
be
not a
Clown World
scientist.
forever.
I'm an author. It's my job to offer an
Like, you know what I
alternative
mean?
point of view and to offer a coherently
I don't
argued
want- I
alternative
wanna
point of view.
take
And
the
I must
red
say,
pill.
Göbekli Tepe strikes me
I
as a
can't take any more
gigantic
blue
fucking
pills, my
mystery.
man. I can't
and
do
a
it.
mystery that is worthy of exploration
Like, it's just
from
too
a
much.
point of view that may not satisfy you.
Oh well, it doesn't. You don't have to satisfy me.
You and your colleagues, and I
That's
don't.
what
I
we're
certainly
learning at
don't
this-
have to
like, this
satisfy
is
you
our,
or
like,
them.
spiritual
That's my
lesson.
But
project.
like your opening
We
chapter
have
with
to
Schmidt,
lift
I thought I
others
really
up
loved
while
the,
we have
the
while
kind
we
of
don't
conversational
have what
style you
we
had with Schmidt in the book,
kind of
where
really
he's dialoguing,
need.
where Schmidt goes and look at this, and then he says,
We still need to lift others
wait,
up.
what's that again? Now he's like, a
They're in
little bit
worse
like
shape than
Columbo.
we-
Like,
like we
wait,
are.
just one more,
It's
just one
crazy.
more question, and the mystery kind of thickens. That's perfectly okay. That's great. I mean, that's what science is all about: is uncovering mysteries that we then have to figure out. So there's always
That's
more
terrible,
mysteries.
man. I'm so
but
sorry,
that doesn't
man.
mean that's not positive evidence in favor of a particular theory like the lost civilization. It's just we can't explain this. Full stop.
Yeah.
We certainly can't explain it, and you can't explain it by saying that we underestimated hunter and gatherers either.
Well,
is
why
always
not?
in
We know they
pain.
made it. Whatever you want to call them.
Well, we know humans made it.
That's right. We know humans made it. So whatever you want to call them.
But why do they believe that people were only hunters and gatherers 12,000 years ago? It's because they didn't have
Yeah,
any
I had that
evidence
when
to the
I broke
contrary.
my arm,
This
man.
is evidence to the contrary.
I agree.
When the shock,
So you agree that there weren't hunter and gatherers?
I disappeared for like
But there's
2 months.
several stages in between. Just 12 people living out in the jungle by
Almost
themselves
died, man.
versus
It was fucked.
us.
Like, I'm not
there's
even
like a whole
joking.
bunch of different.
Well, I would say that Göbekli Tepe
Had
is a
insane
gigantic
fever.
stage.
Well, we don't. Okay, they didn't live there, so we.
I
we have to
wasn't
figure out,
eating.
well,
I
where
think I was
where were they living
vomiting.
and what was there?
I
So
wasn't
that
eating.
has to be excavated.
Well, they only excavated 10% of it, right?
And meanwhile, what you're saying is that we shouldn't speculate at all because
And I
I
was
mean,
swearing
mainstream
insane.
archaeology is
Speculate-
speculating.
no,
Mainstream
speculate
archaeology is
perfectly okay.
speculating when saying it's
His
definitely
episode
was
cooked
hunter-gatherers
it
who
really
did this.
well.
That's also a
That seems
Yeah,
speculation.
man.
more of a reach.
So you
Okay, but
said
not,
you
okay,
fixed
it. May,
it.
They may be more than hunter
Said it went
gatherers.
away
They
eventually.
have been partially settled. You can have any kind of number of states.
But what you can't apparently have is the possibility of a transfer of
told
technology from
you
people who are really
fucking-
masters of that technology
Okay,
already
but-
when they
but-
came
worked
in.
at-
Where are these?
You worked
Where's-
at
Well, you're
Deerhurst,
dealing with an
where are their
incredible
homes?
12,000
and you
years
still
ago,
seem like a
it's all fingerprints
sane
are there. Let's
type
find
of
their
guy,
homes. I don't
man.
know.
Like, dude, I
I don't
can't
know that
even.
their homes matter. Would
Dude,
their homes
like,
even survive
I can't
after
imagine
12,000
the shit
years?
that you've
I'm not
seen.
sure.
They're trash.
But what
they're
survives?
tools,
Like,
they're
man.
something.
Well, what
Screw
would be,
trash and tools. We've got Göbekli Tepe. It confronts us. It
you
challenges
seem
the
like a hard
mainstream model.
guy.
I think it's reasonable to consider the possibility that
Her
there was
husband
something
lies
more
down
than just
beside her at
hunter-gatherers
night and
involved here in
cries from
creating
a
this
nerve
extraordinary
and
place. And that's all I've
Holy
done.
shit.
It seems to me that to say hunter-gatherers could build this, wouldn't be opposed to the
Well, the
idea
same
that
shit
they're
a World War II
hunting
soldiers
and
had,
gathering.
yeah.
But it does certainly
Yeah.
imply a lot of leisure time.
yes.
A lot of
Yeah,
leisure
man.
time.
Well,
And-
we know hunter-gatherer. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Let's like,
well, again, if we place this back, particularly
Yeah,
within
you
that,
have.
that climate zone, at
I haven't
11,006 to 12,000, 13,000 years ago, whatever it turns out to be, we're dealing with an
I've smelled it,
extremely
though.
demanding and challenging climate.
Man,
which,
I remember,
which
dude,
wouldn't
I remember my
necessarily, to my
training.
mind, be conducive
Did I
to
tell you
the
the story? My
emergence
training
of a
was at
settled
Deerhurst for the
culture
driver position.
that would be capable of undertaking a project on this scale. And as somebody who's built a lot
And
of things,
I go in and
quite a
I'm
few
like,
heavy
oh,
weights in my time,
what's that
um,
smell?
I find it.
Can we like not have this like smell?
That they would be.
And,
What I would have
and
to
then I
ask is,
kind of
what is their motive?
realized
What
like
is their
where I
motive
was
for
and what
undertaking a
it was,
project on this scale, because it's an enormous project.
and
And to move a
the trainer
20-ton
just looked
block
at me
of
like, "You're
stone
an
is
idiot."
really
like,
a
"Yeah, I'm an
challenging
idiot."
task to undertake.
today.
Well, without
That's why he's training me, I
the
guess.
infrastructure of large machines and so forth.
But to do it by hand, it would be an enormous undertaking. And I, you know, to me, it's like, when are they having time to hunt and gather when they're engaged in a project of this scale?
But we know hunter-gatherers have way more free time than modern society people. That's the one thing we've learned is that
That's not,
it's a
like, I
pretty good way
wish
to
you
make a
didn't
living,
have to do
actually.
that,
They have a
man.
better varied diet than we have. This is the, you know, the Neanderthal diet, right? They have a better varied diet and a lot more free time.
Yeah, but that's
Holy shit, man. I remember those
We knew that
days,
all
man.
along
You
about
were
hunter-gatherers
like,
when we were saying they couldn't
I
build megalithic
remember those
sites.
days, man.
We're
So they
looking
have the
at a
time. They
We'd
have
be
time
like
to
absent, and then
where
we'd
the
be on a
environment is
break, and
undergoing
we'd
rapid
come into chat. I'd be
changes
playing
to which
GoldenEye.
adaptations would be extremely challenging. And we know those changes
Be a
are going on
fucking
all over the
deer
planet. We know that sea levels are rapidly
Like, I
rising
wouldn't be
over
able,
a
I
period
wouldn't
of a
even
few
believe
thousand
it.
years, from a sea stand low of about
It was just
400 feet up to
insane.
the present level. We also know that biotas were shifting dramatically
Holy shit,
all
dude,
over the
those are
planet.
fucking hard times.
effects
You
of the
don't,
Younger
now you're
Dryas were
gone,
growing.
man. You're
Pretty
out of
much
the
that is,
city.
I think, the
No,
emerging
no
consensus
Brampton
now
bullshit, man.
that
You
both
know what I mean?
hemispheres, north and south,
good
are being
stuff,
affected by
man.
the climate changes of the Younger Dryas.
Talk for
So
15 years
what we're
and
doing
has
is
gone
replacing
nowhere.
this,
Yeah, that's
this
crazy,
phenomena,
too.
this project within this context of these extremely challenging times.
After the merger
in which,
with
you know, adaptation to the environmental changes
GFL,
could easily be the
but
all-consuming
I guess the biomed
challenge of
stayed
the
independent.
times. I'm just finding it difficult to imagine a disconnect, to
But
see
the
this
companies are
disconnect
so
between
cheap,
a
man.
project of this magnitude
You know,
and
like,
the
that's,
motive for doing it
you know how it
during
is.
a time when
The companies are so
obviously the
cheap.
environment could be posing serious constraints
So they
upon people's
ask
ability
to
to function.
dispose
in
of
that-
shit in like the
Well,
cheapest,
Randall, we
most
don't even know the
illegal
motives
way.
of the Easter Islanders.
And they're
and
No,
just
we
why
don't.
they
cheap assholes.
raised these huge debt, but we know they did it.
But
And-
isn't
and-
that become a central question, though? What something had to have motivated.
And then it
But
just
then
becomes
let's get back
just
to
a
Göbekli
disaster.
Tepe. So let's just be real clear here. We know they're humans. We know that
And
it's
they-
at least
they do that
12,000
because they
years
win the
old.
business.
And we know that the real dispute here, the real question is, did these people have structures and did they have agriculture?
I
We
remember
know that
when they
were human
merged with
beings.
Shreddit.
They were essentially modern human
The
beings.
Shreddit guys
So,
were like,
were they
yeah, I don't know how
hunter-gatherers, or did they
Seriously
have
makes
structures
money,
and
Before
man.
agriculture?
Göbekli Tepe, they didn't have
In
structures.
Canada,
They didn't have
the U.S. one is a little
Oh,
bit
no,
better
Göbekli
run.
Tepe, they did.
I think just
So
because
the
it's a
fact
bigger
that They were
market,
able to build something so
it helps a
monumental,
lot.
What kind of a leap is it at all to think that these people could figure out how to plant food?
Like the
and
market's
figure out
not
how to
that
make a
big in
house?
Canada.
Well,
It's really not.
I mean, again, if you look back 30,000 years, 40,000
Like,
years, to
you
these
were-
cave paintings, these
You
are
were
pretty
literally,
sophisticated.
dude.
Yeah.
You were
Beautiful.
literally
Clearly they had
incinerating
abstract
body
reasoning,
parts
they could
from
think
all of
from the
Ontario
concrete to the
except
abstract and so
Ottawa.
on. It's not a big reach to go from that to moving stones around.
I'd say there's a big
'Cause that
difference
stuff
between
comes south.
painting and engraving on
Yeah.
cave walls
I
and,
don't
From the
think so.
north.
I
You
mean,
need to see-
to me,
and
the
from
painting is
Windsor.
even
sorry,
more
and creating
It's
sophisticated.
the
the
only
largest
incinerator,
megalithic site that's ever
Dewhurst.
been built on Earth.
Biomed.
Wait a minute.
I think there's a
We had,
huge
there's
difference
an
between those two. I
autoclave
mean,
in
nobody would
Montreal,
compare
right? So all the Quebec stuff
construction
goes to
effort
Saint Remy.
on Stonehenge or Gigantea with cave paintings. I agree with you. The cave paintings are magnificent. I've had the privilege to visit many of the painted caves. Stunning
Yeah, dude,
work. And
like,
as
spiritually,
Picasso said
you
when he
had a
came out of
fucking
Glasgow, we have
insane
invented nothing.
Right.
I mean, they were
spiritual
that
fucking
was that
role,
modern
man.
human mind, symbolic mind at
Right.
work
I
there.
can't
But
even
this
imagine.
is another matter. This is a large-scale construction project that's going on, and it's not just a construction project. It's not like huts. It's hundreds and hundreds of very, very large megalithic pillars, which have to be mobilized, brought to the place. You know, organizing a workforce in order to do
Too
that,
much,
even that
man. Like, you're
requires
such a good
preparation
guy, you
and
don't
time and
deserve
learning and
that,
practice.
you know
It's
what
not
I
something
mean?
that you wake up one morning and just can
It's
do
like-
overnight.
You think that the paintings are more impressive
Like there
than
has,
Göbekli
like,
Tepe?
there's no hope, man.
Yeah.
There's no
Or
hope.
at least
And
comparable.
like we look back
Not
at that
because
job,
that's-
we're
I
like,
think
man,
that's absolutely
Because
ridiculous.
that was a good
convey
job, but it's like, dude,
three-dimensionality on a 2D
yeah, like, there's no
plane,
hope.
That's what Picasso meant. It's like,
Like,
wow,
we've
that's
lost-
incredible. It's like developing perspective.
Like,
and
you
use the
looking back
natural
at
shape of the
Dewhurst,
walls
but
looking
it's
back,
not
like, oh
create
yeah,
a
that was a good job. I wish I had that
three-dimensional
opportunity today. It's like
perspective
me
look.
looking at
That's
Uber
pretty
Eats, like, yeah,
abstract.
I
Comparing
wish
apples and
I had
pears,
the
it's not a
opportunity
construction
today. It's
project.
Okay,
just
so
like,
that-
It's
let's-
not. I
our
don't think it's even
framework of
remotely.
understanding
But I don't
of
think it's even
what
remotely.
we're
But what I'm
even
saying
doing.
is that it doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination to think these people were pretty
It's
smart.
clown
They
world,
had
We
man.
know
I'm
that
just
they were
sick of it.
smart.
I'm
We
sick
know
of
what they were
clown
smart
world.
just because of the fact that those construction projects were done by who? By whoever. We know that they were smart. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe was clearly intelligent. Whoever made those 3D carvings, clearly they were
It's too
intelligent.
much.
But to think that someone drawing on cave
Yo,
paintings
what's up,
is
Lucy
more
Boots?
impressive
Not more
than
impressive,
erecting
just-
20-foot stone columns
Yeah, they were gonna
with
fire me.
three-dimensional
They fired
carvings
my
on them of
boss.
a lot of animals that weren't even native to the
Yo, what up,
region.
Lucy Boots? My friend, nice
That's,
playing
yeah,
this
that's
level in
debatable.
this game.
Certainly the case. Yeah.
Because
Nice.
they could have been
The
extinct
animals were
fossil
native to-
record.
But my point
Okay.
of this show is
Yeah,
that these
that'd be
paintings are like,
insane.
say, 30, 40,000 years
Yeah,
old.
man, I've been
Exactly
seeing
seven. So
your.
there's tens of thousands of years to develop more.
I think
that
I'm
we'll
subscribed to you on
very
YouTube. So
likely to find more archaeological sites.
And yet,
between
up
those
till
sites.
now, we haven't found that. We haven't found all of that intermediate material. Which sees, see, if I could actually see that intermediate material between the upper Paleolithic cave art and Göbekli Tepe, if I could see the gradual evolution and development of skills, I wouldn't need to invoke a lost civilization, the survivors of a lost civilization who've mastered those skills elsewhere to come in and teach those skills at Göbekli Tepe, but it still looks to me like a transfer of technology unless you can show me that evolutionary process whereby I can understand how this group of hunter-gatherers became equipped to create this giant site, where they practiced, where they learned the skills to move the stones, to organize the workforce, to feed and water the workforce in a rather dry place. All of that is actually quite a logistical challenge.
Yep, and obviously somebody met it somehow.
Some humans.
Yes,
right. So the
right,
real question
right.
is, did they have structures? Did they have agriculture? Did they have some sort of a
Probably-
community where they lived in an
probably
established
something.
location?
It's interesting
I would
concept.
imagine
So that would
of-
push
that it
back
could be
the
aliens
time
because-
where we thought that there was a civilization that would push them back into a realm of at least stepping out
Granite?
of the hunter-gatherer stage.
Like, that's
Now, your guy
interesting.
Schmid, as you show in your book, he did not go as far as you go.
Certainly not.
Right.
No.
But he admitted it's a mystery. Okay, why? That would be
Right.
the scientific approach. I don't know what it is. Great mystery.
Like,
let's
if you
just
go to another
wait and see.
planet
Versus
and you find these
I'm
weird
gonna
alien
postulate
things there,
a lost
and you're like,
civilization.
okay, well,
Nothing
I
wrong with
wanna-
that, Grant.
I want
It's a
to
free country.
preserve this
and
organic
scientists do this all the
being
time,
and
as you
stone
mentioned.
forever.
There's
this-
a rather humorous thing, which I have to say. Actually, I might even ask Jamie to pull up the.
It's not really like
couple of images
that
of
crazy an
Fingerprints of the
idea.
Gods. That's the book I'm best known for.
that they
And when
would,
I
aliens would create
published Fingerprints
humans,
of the Gods
statues.
in 1995, essentially, I was saying civilization is much older
and you would
much
think
more
ego would
mysterious
not,
than we
like,
thought.
the aliens wouldn't come here and then
And
build statues
I
of
was
themselves. Not the
for
same. Like,
proposing that.
I mean,
2013, one of the magazines that really
like the ones that
New
create,
Scientist
like,
magazine in
yeah,
Britain
like ego is
publishes as a
important in
cover
those
story
statues,
a
but
picture of Göbekli Tepe and the headline: "Civilization is much older
The
and
ones
much more
that-
mysterious
All
than
right,
we
fair enough.
than we thought."
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. And scientists do this. I mean, I followed
the technology level is
paleoanthropology
so
for
high
my
that-
whole adult life. And one of the big mysteries is, how did we get a big brain? How did we get to abstract
ego might
reasoning
not
from say what chimps
be the
do?
driving force.
No one knows.
The doubling of the human brain
Yeah,
size over a period of
okay,
2 million years,
and
right?
because no one
Because
knows,
you know, it's always better
every
to
couple of years there's a new book out. It's climate change. It was
Throwing
others up.
arm, cooking
that's
food.
right, cooking meat. You know, meat
That's
is
where
another
your
big one.
value
Harvard
comes
for
from,
meat.
not from your
And these
own,
books
not
come
from
and
lifting
go, and
yourself
some
up.
of them have legs, some of them don't.
That's
and
the ego.
It's just the way it goes.
Serves
And
no
then there's
purpose.
Terence
Serves
McKenna's
no
Pretty
goal.
obvious
I
it was
mean,
psychedelics.
Yeah,
other
that's
maybe
Terence
inspiring
McKenna's
Not that
stone
made the
ape
brain
theory.
bigger, but that
but
switched the
Oh,
brain
is this
on.
the old Julian?
it's lifting
the,
others up.
tr-
that
Julian Jaynes, no,
no,
the
makes
bicameral mind, not
you
at all. This is
valuable.
David Lewis Williams, who's professor of anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. His neuropsychological theory of
Other
cave
people's
art,
success.
all kudos to Terence McKenna
what
and
makes
Food of the Gods.
you
What a
valuable.
brilliant thinker, what a brilliant alternative thinker. But David Lewis Williams at the University of Witwatersrand had been working on this problem since 1973, and his argument is that the remarkable similarities that we see in rock and cave art all around the world are explained that we're dealing with a shamanistic art.
Nice little
Shamanism
Zaboos,
involves
thanks,
altered
man.
states of consciousness.
Legend.
This is typical
I'm
visions of
trying
altered
the
states of consciousness,
strat,
and it
man.
seems
I'm
to have
trying it,
accompanied
man,
a
but-
great leap forward in human behavior.
I don't know.
And you
As
covered this in your
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
I covered it in Supernatural.
Supernatural.
As did Richard Wrangham's theory. This is a highly regarded scientist at Harvard. So he's the meat-eating guy. That it's
Right.
cooking meat.
Right.
So by cooking the protein, that's what gives you the energy to build a huge brain. All right. So now this guy is starting with 10 pluses on his side. He's Harvard, already respected, and even so, his book was like, maybe.
Well, it's probably a series of different events and a bunch of
It
different
could be.
factors.
That's right. Could be a number
Right.
of different things.
So let's get away from Göbekli Tepe and ancient civilizations, and let's get back to the geological evidence, which, Randall, you're an expert at. And this
Oh,
is one of the
man.
main things that you had a dispute with, and this is one of the reasons why we got everybody together. Now, what is your thoughts on what Randall and Graham
I
proposed,
might switch
specifically
games. I
Randall,
might do
who's
it.
much more on the geological side of things.
Yeah. Well, this is why I brought
I'll
in my
play this a bit
friend,
more. Right.
a geologist. So, but by way of background, after your show, I thought, let's just give this a fair hearing. This is what we do. So this will be our cover story, and I think the end of summer issue comes out. We're only quarterly.
I hope that Mark Defant is going to be doing some more work on the draft of his article for you that is up online, because that article is full of bullshit statements about me which are demonstrably false.
Well, he's on.
Yeah,
here,
he's
so
there, and
you
I'm
can-
happy
you
to.
can
I'm happy
ask
to.
him.
Yeah, and
engage
it's
with
Mercury
those
retrograde
particular
too,
issues
so
as
it's like
well.
I
have to put on my reading
know.
glasses.
And that,
I
whatever
just
article's
know it's
online,
not
this is how
gonna
we publish
happen.
it.
Well,
So
it claims
You know
that
what I
it's
mean?
a draft of the article that will appear in a 2017 edition of
Full
Skeptic
moon.
magazine.
So pull it up,
It's
Graham,
Mercury
and
retrograde, man.
Why
give
don't we
you a
bring
chance
Mark
to have
on
your
and
time.
There's an
Yeah.
excuse,
Let's
but
let
man.
Graham go over it first,
So-
and then we'll have Mark on
So
to
here's
refute what he said.
Defant on Magicians of the Gods. And by the way, Michael, I mean, you say that you're
We're
here
doing pretty
to,
well though in this
to
Mercury
respectfully
retrograde, to be
aim to
honest.
get at the truth.
Yeah.
There it is, conjuring
let
up
me-
a lost civilization from
Yeah,
nothing.
let me just
is like-
get to the top of this. I've got it here. Just bear with me a second. So, amongst the words in Mark Defant's article, he is accusing me of duping the public. He's saying that I'm public enemy number one. He's accusing me of arm
Slow is
waving.
incredible.
I do wave my arms. Pontificating. Well, my grandfather was a minister of the church. Little interest in peer-reviewed research. Claimed that no academic would debate. That's utter bullshit. I had a debate with Zahi Hawass. He's a leading Egyptian Egyptologist. Back in 2015, it was not my fault that Zahi Hawass walked out on that debate. I can play the video if you like, a minute and a half of Zahi Hawass lambasting me and then walking out and refusing to debate further. So it's bullshit to say I don't debate or I'm not willing to debate. And finally, he says that I'm conning a hellacious number of people into buying his books. Now, how can we get any dialogue going when somebody begins like that?
Okay.
Then would you like some further? Bear with me, because I just have to scroll down and I don't have a mouse. I don't have a mouse. So Hancock and Carlson claimed several times that no academic would debate them. Not true. I'm accused of doing an about face since Fingerprints of the Gods. Are my views not allowed to evolve with new evidence? Is that somehow a
Well,
crime on my part? Let me just finish.
Yeah.
Then a cheap shot, he cites Jesus Gamara. And
really
accuses me
do
of
love
not
this level.
not having the scientific knowledge to deal with issues of gravitation. Now, it's true that Jesus Gamara, who is a descendant of the Incas, who has worked 70 years on the megaliths of Sacsayhuaman, whose father before him, Alfredo Gamara, worked 70 years. It's true that he's got a way-out theory about gravitation. Thing is, I state in my book that it's a way-out theory. What
It's
I
just
go
so
on to say, quoted
spectacular.
in the attack, is that, however, this isn't the part of his theory I'm interested in. Where I feel he is solidly persuasive is in his observations of the anomalous character of the monuments of the Andes, etc., etc. Defant doesn't cite that. He just presents me as buying what Jesus Gamara says. I mean, if that's the standard that you're going to have in Skeptic magazine, you have a serious problem. And then
So
Gobekli
crazy.
Tepe,
This level's so crazy
he contends
because,
that Gobekli Tepe is too advanced
man,
to have
you
been completed
know
by
that
hunter-gatherers
elusive
and must have
boost, like
been
the
constructed by a more
inspiration
advanced civilization. Well,
for the
no, that's not what I
strat
say.
is
I
in
say it
chat
was
right
constructed
now.
by
We did it on
hunter-gatherers,
Xbox.
but that they were advised and supported by
Yes,
people who had
Toad,
knowledge
me
of this
too,
kind of work
broski.
beforehand.
Me
How
too,
is that
dude.
different?
Getting a what?
You
It's
missed
very
the history
different. I'm not saying it was constructed
169,
by, I'm
man.
saying that a group of people settled amongst
169 is
hunter-gatherers
epic.
and transferred some skills for them. He says that,
Nice, man.
he quotes me, Hancock makes the following stunning claim, quote, "Our ancestors are being initiated into the secrets of metals
Cool,
and how
man.
to make swords and knives."
Yeah,
I do
bro.
not
You
make
like
that claim.
with the weather
I'm
and
reporting
temperature
that
and
this
everything, so
claim
nice.
is made in the Book of Enoch.
Gotta enjoy
That
it.
is not my claim. Then what else?
Goose
So you
posted
don't
a
think
photo
that's the explanation.
Well, I'm being misrepresented
for
by
like
your
his
author.
Patreons,
all right, but
and you
if
can
he
see
wants
he's
to
like
represent me, if he
tanned and
accuses me of
happy, and it's
cherry-picking,
like
he
that's
shouldn't
nice,
cherry-pick
man.
my statements. He should
We're
quote
still
his
working
sources.
on this. Let's get it right.
Well, it's
so
out
you
there.
don't. You
It's-
don't.
it's
Being
out there
happy
online.
and sunny.
Well,
You still working
oh,
on
and
it?
then-
tan.
and here's a-
no,
here-
no,
here's a
I
beautiful
didn't-
one.
I didn't know it was online.
Here's a beautiful one. He cites Klaus Schmidt on the
I
on the
don't
character.
know when
And
to
Schmidt
do
makes
this
a
fucking
salient
winter
point,
again.
almost as
Like,
if he anticipated
I'm
it.
already depressed.
Quote, fabulous or mythical creatures
I'm
such as
already
centaurs
depressed,
or
man.
the sphinx, winged bulls or horses do not yet occur in the iconography,
I
and
don't know
therefore
what's
in the
gonna happen in
mythology
the
of
winter.
prehistoric times they must be
gonna go
recognized as
crazy.
creations of the high cultures
Lose
which
my
arose
mind.
later. Well, bullshit. You've just been talking about the painted caves. Go to Chauvet Cave. You will see a lion man, Hohensteinstadel, lion man carved out of
Like, do I
carved
just
out
go
of
full
mammoth
retard
ivory.
and just play
Go to
N64
Chauvet,
forever?
bison man, straddling lion woman. Her right
I'm not
arm
saying
is
that's
transferring,
retarded. What I'm
is
saying is, like,
transforming into into the head of a
I mean, that
lion.
is kind of my
So
dream.
certainly these mythical creatures did exist in the Upper Paleolithic, and it's rubbish to say that they didn't. I mean, how can I go on? The
It's not like
teapot.
sustainable though.
Okay, so he's taking issue with
Also
me
play Mario.
because I suggest that the vulture on pillar 43 in enclosure D is representing the
I mean, it is
teapot
sustainable.
asterism
Yo,
of the
with your
constellation of
donations, so
Sagittarius, and
thank
he
you, man.
goes and
And
gives us
Baron,
little
the
things about
subs,
Uncle
dude. It's
Sam
like,
and
it's so crazy.
some other thing that
It's
he
just
shows.
20
Anybody can impose
subs,
any
like,
image
it's
on
just, bro.
anything.
Thank
Well,
you,
it's
man.
not my fault that a
Thank
couple
you,
of
guys.
academics who didn't even talk to me and had nothing whatsoever to do to me have published a major study in the, I quote it again,
Only if
the
you can afford it, you know what I
Mediterranean
mean?
Archaeology
Obviously,
and
like, you're
Archaeometry, a peer-reviewed journal, where they make
an adult.
precisely that identification. So at least I'm not alone.
You know what I'm saying?
At least there are
feel obligated.
peer-reviewed credentialed scholars who also agree that that figure is representing the teapot
Yo, what's
asterism
up?
within the
Secret
constellation of
Bezos?
Sagittarius.
Yeah, I know,
no
man.
reference to that. Schock's opinions, we're supposed to not go into the minutiae because they've already been
I wouldn't be
dismissed by a
surprised if
study
Toad
by
is like a
Laritsis and
crypto
Vafiadou.
millionaire.
Far from it. That study doesn't dismiss Schock at all.
Speaking
None
of
of
which,
that
yo,
study was
how's
done on the body
your,
of the
how are
Sphinx
your, some of
itself.
your,
It was done in
your
the Valley of
penny
the Sphinx temples.
bitcoins
And by the
going,
way,
man?
the dates are
Your
extremely
penny
troubling.
crypto.
Some of them could push it as far as 3,600
Penny
BC
crypto
that the work was
stocks.
done, or as early in some cases as 1,000 BC.
Penny
I don't
stocks
think
crypto.
that study proves anything, and so
Well,
on
so
and so
just
forth.
to clarify what you do believe, then, so that we don't misrepresent you. So you don't
Meme
think
coin.
that the lost
Not
civilization
meme coin, but
instructed them on the use of metals?
yeah, I think it was meme
I
coin,
don't
to be
know.
honest.
I don't see evidence for that.
But,
Gobekli
but why
Tepe.
would you put that in the book then?
I didn't put it in the book. I was quoting the Book of Enoch. It's a
Hillary.
huge passage on the Book
Yeah,
of
Toad
Enoch.
is the best
It's
emo
not me
too.
who's saying that. It's the Book of Enoch that's saying
Okay, I
that.
understand, but why? I forget
All I
what, I forget what the
require, all I
context.
require your defant to do, is to state that Hancock is citing the Book of Enoch. He didn't do that.
Okay.
That's,
I
that
guess
is,
all
what's
right,
the
fair
what's the
enough, that's
word?
fine, fair enough,
disingenuous. Is that the polite word you guys use?
But
Guys, I
It's
really
more than
appreciate you
disingenuous. It's a character.
seeing
what
me
the
play
question
this
is
level
why
because
would- what's the context of including?
if I try to play any other level,
Well, the context
it would just be
is
for
that
the
actually
ego.
I
You
was,
know what I
I was
mean?
criticizing
Like I
Zacharias
know
Sitchin.
you're probably going crazy with me
primarily what I
seeing
was
So
doing.
you don't
fucking
think that a
level
lost
over and over
civilization
again, but
instructed the people who
the
built Gobekli
only
Tepe on the use of metals and tools?
I see no evidence for
level
that. I
that's
see
not
Gobekli Tepe.
maxed.
I can't go say they instructed them on the
So
use of
maybe
metals and tools unless I can find
this?
evidence
Well,
for
so
it.
what did they do?
Caverns
They
00 and
generated
SA.
agriculture. They created a center of excellence around
Maybe
which
we
No,
need-
not
hunter-gatherer.
they who built Gobekli Tepe. The lost civilization that advised them that you think happened.
Yeah.
What did they do if they?
You know what I mean?
They've come through a cataclysm. They're survivors, few in number. This is my scenario. You don't have to accept it. I'm sure you don't. They settle
I'm not
amongst, take
skilled
refuge
enough to go
amongst
for something like
hunter-gatherers. I mean, I
like
don't know. you
Egypt
probably
43 or
have some
some shit.
survival skills. I don't have many. I mean, if we were to have a comet impact in the world today, which were to take out all the underpinnings of modern civilization, I might go settle with hunter-gatherers because they're the people who know best how to
That's
live
where I would
in
go.
that
Right.
situation.
Yeah, I'm gonna reload
Yeah,
it
so go
again.
settle amongst hunter-gatherers, but I might be able to transfer some of my knowledge to them. I might have something.
You guys
that I
have
can
already
transfer
lifted
to
my
them, and I might have
spirits.
very strong reasons why I might not choose to transfer all of it.
Man, I was
So
fucking
in other
freaking
words,
out. I
perhaps
was really
this is what
freaking out.
happened. Okay, maybe, but how is that different from Zacharias Sitchin's? That well, the aliens advised them.
Well, I
that's
don't
a
need.
lot different.
I think it's massively different, especially since Zacharias Sitchin has his aliens arriving here in 1970s NASA technology.
That was
Weirdly,
not
he wrote his
close.
book in the 1970s. I mean, I don't.
What the fuck is
I
this?
don't go there. I don't make that. I don't
Yeah,
make that
but why-
suggestion. I'm
why
simply
not?
saying, perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history. Perhaps its fingerprints are present at a number of sites around the world, but
Oh,
perhaps
you know
the
what's a good
extremely
game?
defensive,
Halo
arrogant,
1.
and patronizing attitude of
I
mainstream
might just play
academia
Halo 1
is
on my
stopping us from
Xbox
considering
and
that
stream it.
possibility, and therefore I
God,
campaign
that was
to
such
get
a
that
game.
possibility
Legendary?
considered, and I try to do so with as loud a voice
Legendary
as possible.
difficulty?
Well, you're doing it. You're doing it, man.
But doesn't it disturb you that you run Skeptic magazine and someone publishes something like that? That goes against the whole idea of critical thinking. I mean, it's misrepresenting his quotes. It's misrepresenting his perspective, his point of view. It's really disingenuous.
This is one reason we're doing this, so we could get his.
But why would anybody write something like that? And why
Yeah,
would you guys
guys,
publish
so-
something like that without checking the facts?
We are. That's not supposed to be posted online.
And why is
This
such
is
a
one of the
person?
Seems like
why
when we
is-
get involved with
online,
politics
though. How
one
does
way or
something get
another.
online if it's not
Why is such a
supposed to?
person who will do that a
He's
useful
actually friends,
contributor to your side of the
family
debate?
friends with the conservative
One of the
candidate
reasons
for
we're here is
Orleans.
to get your point of view
And
exactly
she,
right. All right. So you're
she
saying
does,
that there's no evidence that any lost civilization.
she does like
exists.
work for one of the
Only
members
I'm
of
not saying
parliament
that. I'm
Only
saying
the
for out west.
fingerprints
She's like
of
the Ottawa.
Their influence on later peoples we do
The
know
person
existed.
from the
I'm
member
saying
of
they're
parliament
physical
isn't
objects.
always
I say
there
the
in
Reiki
Ottawa.
Tepe is one of them. I say
Out
the Sphinx
west,
is
right?
another.
But see, this is that argument from
So,
either ignorance or
and if I'm
personal
chosen
ability.
as the
I don't
PPC
accept
candidate
the
for
mainstream,
Orleans,
or
which
I can't
honestly
think of how
it
this
looks like it
pyramids
might
could have
be,
been built, therefore it was built
I'm just
by
gonna be talking
somebody
to people,
else
man.
through some other technology.
That's
And
not
I think
what
that's
I'm
gonna
saying.
how-
That's just, they're just post-dating.
But I think that's how I'm gonna
Well, I'm
find a
saying the
job.
The Sphinx is
Just from
older.
talking to people.
I do go with Robert Schock's argument on the geology. I'm also very interested in
If
the
I'm doing this
astronomy
life
of the site.
insurance
And again,
thing,
I have slides that I could show on this if we have.
Me literally
if we
just
have
talking
time,
to people in
you might want
the
to get into
town.
Ed Krupp's criticism
It's-
of the
it's
Orion
like
correlation.
it's starting to
and
make
why he says
sense,
it's upside down.
even
I
if
can
I
talk
don't
to you about
understand
that.
it.
You know.
We do. I mean, I know Ed Krupp's argument about that.
Because it's not
That
about the
was from
party.
The 90s, I think.
What's
It's
your
not about
thoughts
like
on
it's.
Robert
What I'm
Schock's
learning, it's not about the party. It's not
conclusions?
I
about.
don't. That's not something I
I
know.
mean, it
anything
is. You gotta
about.
make sure you're not part of
Well, that's
the
a huge
Yeah.
factor.
the
It's a huge
globalist
factor.
fucking party.
It's all about water
But-
Mark knows about Schock,
It's
and he
about
rejects
fucking
it on
building
the basis
unity
of
at
that
the
paper.
individual
And
level.
that paper really doesn't date the Sphinx. It works with dating
And just
of
learning
large
what
blocks in the
people's
valley and the
issues
Sphinx
are.
temple. There's not a single sample taken from the Sphinx.
All right, then who dated it?
If I can
Who dated
literally
it?
help
Lyricist and Baffiano.
sell them
And then
like
why,
investments
why
or
do
some
mainstream
shit,
archaeologists not accept the older date for the
give them
Sphinx?
better financial
And the
shape.
answer is because they have a whole
Maybe some
bunch
life
of other
insurance.
evidence that points to the date that they think
The
it
answer
does.
is very to your
Provide a
question is
huge
very simple.
endowment
Mark
for
Lehner
the
and Zahi
following
Hawass
generations.
put it on record back in 1992. When
Because it's
John
not
Anthony
about
West
like
and Robert
winning.
Schock
It's
first
not about winning.
presented
It's not about
the
money.
rainfall erosion evidence on the Sphinx.
It's about like helping others.
And what Lehner and Hawass said is the
it's
Sphinx
like, I'm
can't
gonna do
possibly
that.
be 12,000 plus years old because there was no
For
other
money.
culture anywhere in the world that was capable of creating large-scale monumental architecture like this. Show me one
Listen,
other
do it.
structure that's capable of doing that. Well, they could say that in 1992, Michael, but they can't
Because I'm
say it
strong
in
and healthy
2017, not since Göbekli
and
Tepe
smart.
has
If
been
you don't mind,
and
excavated.
Graham, could you
educated.
please, for people, so this could be a
And able.
standalone thing, people could
know what I
understand.
mean?
What is the argument
that's gonna be
about
the
Sphinx,
force,
the
I
enclosure of
think.
the Sphinx? And Dr. Robert
Yeah, the
Schock,
force of
Boston
like
University,
change,
who's a geologist,
Yes.
what was his
of
conclusion?
unity.
What Schock is saying is that the Sphinx and the trench
All
out
the
of
other,
which
all
the
the other
Sphinx is
bullshit.
cut
It's just bullshit. It's a
bears
clown.
the
It's just fake.
unmistakable
It's just
evidence of
like the integrity.
precipitation-induced weathering.
The
Weathering
integrity
caused
is-
by
and the
exposure to a
persistence is what
substantial period of heavy
will
rainfall.
define
And that is particularly pointed out in the vertical
future.
fissures in the trench. So you see, the Sphinx itself has been subject to so much restoration over
So
so
just
many
fucking
years that
talking
it's
with
difficult
people,
for
man.
people to even see the core body of the Sphinx today. But it's these, you can see the vertical fissures even down at the back of there. That is what Schock
And the
counts
union,
as
we need to get a fucking
precipitation-induced
union,
weathering.
man. We need to
Heavy
unionize
rainfall,
people.
which is selectively removing the softer layers
We
and
need to
leaving the
educate
harder
people
layers in place. And the problem is we don't
about
have
the
that rainfall
globalists, man.
in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall. That's the suggestion.
So that's the suggestion by Robert Schock,
Yeah.
independently of,
Yes.
of your
And it's like I
conclusions.
feel
Totally
like the
independent.
money will
Schock
follow
disagrees with me
somehow.
on many things,
Somehow.
as a matter of fact, and I disagree with him on many
Like
things.
if I
but
talk, if I
can
start
sell money.
talking to
So
some,
that alone would set back at least that.
I think
one,
I
mean,
would
it's
be able
pretty
to
much
find a job
established
through
that
just
the
talking
Great
with people.
Pyramid of Giza
But I
was
mean, that's not
constructed
like the
about
goal isn't for
2500
me,
BC,
right?
There's
But
absolutely no doubt that a huge project went on at Giza
if I
around
talk to like
2,500
some
BC.
So
car
your argument
dealerships,
involved the
is
pyramids.
not that the whole
car
thing
dealerships were
was
sitting
that
on their
much older,
hands.
was that parts of it
have
seem to
cars
have
to
been
sell.
from an earlier civilization, or at
Yes.
least that
Globalist
civilization
fucking
far,
mandates
far
and shit.
earlier than
I
was.
would say
They have
that
a
the
lot of
ground
money.
plan, what we have at Giza, the basic
they would
layout of
provide
the
probably
site was
donation.
established in
I mean,
what the
I'm not
ancient
assuming they
Egyptians
would,
called
but
Zep
like
Tepe the
it's
first time. Astronomically and geologically,
can't assume,
I and
but
my
I'm saying,
colleagues
like,
suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12.5 to
can never assume the
13,000
money.
years
If you
ago.
provide some sort of like
That was when the site
tax
was laid out, because
benefit
there's intriguing
or
astronomical
tax
alignments
relief,
of
like
the
in
Great
the, and like
Pyramids
if
to the
I'm a
Belt of Orion.
financial
I know
advisor
Edinburgh
and we
has
can somehow
completely
get the
opposite view on
fucking
this. and of the Great Sphinx
auto
to the
dealership
constellation of Leo,
tax
rising due
benefits
east,
and
housing the sun on the equinox,
provide
the astrological
donations to
age
my
of
party?
Leo. Again,
Like,
I have
that's
slides
like
I can
And that
5D
would
chess,
align with the
man.
geological evidence that Robert
Starting to make
Schoch
sense, man.
It
concludes
aligns with the geological evidence.
thousands of
age
years
the
ago.
Sounds
age
like
of Leo
corruption, but
pretty much
man.
exactly spans the Younger Dryas, as a matter of fact.
And so the only argument against that
Honestly?
at the time was that there were no other structures like
It's starting
that
to
from
all make
12,000 years
sense,
ago.
come together.
And then Krupp
I just
said
start
that
talking to
the
businesses,
Orion
get them
correlation wasn't
fucking
real,
just group life
because it
insurances
was
for their
upside down.
employees
But do you
too.
want to get into that now?
The employees
Well,
pay into.
That's not the only argument. It's that, okay, if
And they get
the Sphinx
benefits
is
from it?
built, or the layout for the whole thing is built in, say 10, 11,000 years ago, and then the pyramids are built, 2,500
I think it's gonna be
BC.
through the politics,
What
man.
happened in between?
I think it's the
Where are all the
politics that's
people,
gonna
the trash, the
get
places where they
me
live
Well, there's
in
a
that
bunch of
area?
different styles of
talking
construction.
out
Something like
there.
a,
But not
I-
dated in between.
'Cause
I
that's,
would propose,
that's
Michael, something
what
like a
drives
monastery,
me, really.
which has a relatively small
It's
archaeological
fiat
footprint
money,
is on
and
the
it's
site.
just
I mean,
all
the idea
fake. I don't really care about it.
information,
It's
knowledge, and
important to help
traditions
other
lasting
people,
for
but man,
thousands of years within a religious system shouldn't be
employment,
too
like,
absurd to us. I mean, Judaism is
the
dealing with
driving
ideas
force
that are
is
already
the
about 4,000
is
years
like
old
the
if we go back to Ur,
politics.
the Chaldees and so on and so forth.
It
So
has to
that's
be
all
right
I'm
now.
suggesting, really,
It
that,
has to
that
be
the
so
idea is
crazy.
preserve, maintain that the survivors
where?
of the
Not
survivors
even the
on the
politics,
site,
just
but in
like
something like a monastery, which
listening to
has
what
got a
others-
very small archaeological
their
footprint.
issues
It is
are.
not high. Perhaps again, one can only speculate. And I think there's a lot of speculation on the archaeological side too. One can only speculate, perhaps having gone through a cataclysm, perhaps
Because
they
I'm in a
felt
really
to blame
interesting
for this.
position
Wrongly
if
or
I
rightly.
become
I
the
mean, there
People's
are
Party
many traditions
member,
in
right?
which
Because it's like
humanity's behavior
I'm
is
entering it
implicated
knowing
in the
that I may not
cataclysm
win,
that takes
right?
place.
But
And
with
perhaps they
that,
didn't want to switch civilization on completely
you
right there.
you got
Perhaps
the
they,
Joker
perhaps
card,
they
man.
waited, passed down the knowledge through initiates.
The ring of
Enough was
invisibility.
there to create a
The
mystery,
objectivity,
because
you
it's
get to hear what
undoubtedly a
people
mystery
really
that the
think and
construction of the Great
their
Pyramids,
true opinions.
the first
If I start working for
huge
like the
pyramids in Egypt
conservatives, just
preceded
to
only
see what
really
they
by
are
the
on the
Zoser
inside,
pyramid in
man.
Saqqara,
Because
that the
there's
construction of
like
the Great
there's a
Pyramids
front
is
line
vastly
of the
superior
of the
to
globalists,
construction of
right?
the pyramids of
Somewhere.
the fifth and sixth
My
dynasty
friend
that followed
that
it, and
is
that's
a
a little bit
conservative leader in
counterintuitive that
Canada,
we have this
in
collapse in
Orleans.
skills. One would have expected it to
She's
got better.
not
So it sounds like
globalist, right?
the work on the pyramid started.
But I think the
already
person
with a
she
level
might
of
be
knowledge.
working for might be like a World
Yes, but,
Economic
okay, so here's-
Forum
Here's how I would think about
plant.
that. There's a lot of perhaps
And I wanna
and
see,
maybes.
like, there's a front
yes, well,
line.
so you have
There's
a
like
bunch of Egyptologists
there's
and
a
archaeologists who have been
there's a
working on
front
this
line
site for centuries. This is
of
one of the most ancient mysteries and so on. And so let's say there's like 20 lines of
like
evidence
this
that point to
cyber
roughly around this
global
time period here.
assault.
And then you come on and say, okay,
And I
but
just
there's
want
this
to, I just
one
want to
anomaly of the rain
look,
thing.
I want to
There was
glimpse
only
into it.
rain at
I
this
want to like
time.
glimpse.
Now there's a huge
'Cause I
gap.
would
You have
learn
one
so much,
anomaly or
man. Oh
line
my
of
God.
evidence here and like
Can you
20
imagine?
here.
Well, we're talking
Like
about different
infiltrated
structures, though. There's not a
by
lot of evidence that
infiltrated
points to the
Conservative
Sphinx being
Party.
from a particular time period.
Well,
You
you
just
say
learn.
like 12,000, right?
I'm saying the rainfall evidence suggests
Right,
that.
but other evidence.
And
So
its
that-
alignment,
Because they're
and
like-
its alignment
they're
with the constellation
globalists
of Leo
to the-
housing the sun.
to
the
at
core-
dawn
right,
on the
to the
spring
core,
equinox. It's
they're
an
friggin'
equinoctial
the
marker. Nobody
Borg.
would dispute that. Nobody would dispute that the ancient Egypt. Well, no. I mean, if you make a monument pointing perfectly due east, I've stood on the back of the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox, and believe me, again, I could
Just
show a
to
picture.
learn,
Its
man,
head
you know?
lines up perfectly with the rising sun. No, I don't think
I think I
anybody,
would
even
gain a
Krupp,
lot
is
of
disputing that it's an
knowledge,
equinoctial
power,
marker. Now, here's the thing:
the
you're
knowledge.
an ancient Egyptian. You're building an equinoctial marker in 2,500 BC. Do you know what constellation is housing the sun in 2,500 BC?
I haven't run the little program.
Well, it's the
infiltrate the House
constellation of
Commons.
Taurus.
So
So logically, if
I
you're
start-
creating an equinoctial,
I start sitting in for the fucking,
images
the
of bulls. Plenty of
conservative
them.
MP
If
at
you're making an
Southwest.
equinoctial marker in 2,500 BC, you really should create it in the form of a bull, not in the form of a lion. You know, that's the puzzling issue. And yet we do have a time when a lion constellation housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, and that is the period of the Younger Dryas.
okay, I'd say that's a pretty big leap. And
Well, I
that's-
know you'd say that, and your colleagues all say that too.
And so now, and then we have a gap of about 5,000 or 6,000 years where there's nothing. There's no.
Well,
Let
realize
me
I'm
interject
just-
there.
Yeah,
Can
so
I
sorry.
interject?
Yeah, please do.
No,
I'm
Please
going to
do.
refer back
And
to
it's like I
some
have
articles that
energy,
were
I can do
published
that,
in
but
the
it's like I
80s and
fear the
90s. This one is
food
from,
running out,
from
man.
Nature, early 80s, late
I fear
Quaternary
the,
history
like,
of
the
the Nile.
famine.
And what it's discussing is
globalist
the evidence
famine.
that there was a major shift
They really trying
the
to fuck
hydraulic
us,
regime
man.
of the Nile River. It says between 20,000 and 12,000 years before present, when timberline in the headwaters was lower, vegetation cover more open than today, the Nile was a highly seasonal braided river, which brought mixed
this-
coarse and fine
this-
sediments down to Egypt and
The
Sudan.
strap, man.
This cold, dry interval had ended by 12,500 years before present, when overflow from Lake Victoria and higher rainfall in Ethiopia sent extraordinary floods down the main Nile. And those floods have been documented to have been 120 feet above the modern floodplain of the Nile. Any civilization, or whatever you want to call it, living along the Nile River at that time would have had to abandon whatever they were doing there in this regime, this intensified hydraulic regime. And it goes on to say, it marked a revolutionary change to continuous flow with a superimposed flood peak. So what happened is that there was a major environmental change that occurred right there around 12,000 to 12,500 years. The dating could be adjusted somewhat since the early 80s, but the point is made is that because of a major hydrological change, major vegetational cover change, major environmental change, this would have caused also imposed changes upon whatever culture was existing there or living there at the time. Now what we have is, in the aftermath of that event,
Did he pass away?
The emergence of deserts.
I'm so bad at this level.
Would require serious adaptation.
I'm terrible at this level.
It's very likely, too, that these events could have also decimated the population at the time, leaving basically no workforce. And then over a period of 2 or 3 or 4
That was the
years,
worst.
you find that
It may have been the worst.
that there's enough of a recovery that these kind of monumental structures can be renewed.
That was such a terrible
This and a lot of other studies in the Eastern Mediterranean showing that there are sap-repel layers, which is basically material that has been washed in from the continental surface that has not oxidized. It has essentially become rotten and carried in organic material.
I told you,
carried
you
in
make
off
such
of
a
the
good point. Look at
continents
this
by
fucking
this
shitty thing.
enhanced regime of water flow. Actually
So
forcing
terrible.
so much water that there was a freshwater lid on the Eastern Mediterranean
Piece of shit,
that
Lonnie.
caused a cessation in the circulation between the upper waters and the lower waters, reducing the amount of oxygen brought down to the lower waters, and so you had these layers of mud
Actually, I like
that
this
formed
level
on
a
the
lot.
bottom of the Mediterranean that show this massive influx of fresh water flowing out of the Nile. And
Honestly,
off of the
Depot 00 is like
Egyptian
one of the
continent
top
at
levels
the
in my
same
opinion.
time. So clearly the evidence shows that there were major climatic changes that occurred around this time. It is not so speculative to imagine that whatever, and we don't have to invoke any kind of a super advanced civilization, but whatever cultures were there that were perhaps capable of carving blocks of stone, transporting blocks of stone, as they were at Göbekli Tepe during this
What are you
time range,
doing?
would have been that their activity would have been interrupted to the extent that it might have taken millennia to recover, to get the labor force necessary to undertake major monumental programs on the Giza Plateau. So I think that if we assume this gradualistic scenario, yeah, that's a fair question to ask. What happened?
Yeah, I
in
told
that
they're
interval?
psychopaths, man.
But
They
if
were
there
gonna
is
fire
a
me for
major
sure.
climatic downturn
100%.
and a major disruption of the
100%.
settled patterns of whatever culture was already there,
The
then
lawyer told me
now we might have an explanation why there would be
he's
a
gonna fire me.
especially if these events caused a bottleneck in the population of the area. Of course, this is all speculative, but it is not speculative to say that there is multiple lines of evidence suggesting these major, even cataclysmic changes that engulfed
Fucking
that part of
asshole,
the
man.
world during that era. So that could
Whatever,
provide
man.
an explanation of why there is a gap.
I'm a free man.
Makes a ton of sense.
Well, it doesn't, because
Does it not?
only if you have to have the Sphinx in conjunction with 12,000 years ago in the lost civilization. If you just say
It's
the
too much, man.
rainwater erosion on the Sphinx,
I brought in like
it's
so
not
much
an
money for that
explanation the
company.
age, and that the traditional
Like,
accepted
honestly,
age is what we think it is.
it's too much.
Then there's no gap to fill.
Yeah.
So really, all we're talking about is we have, again, lots of evidence here, one anomaly
It's too
here.
much.
I really want the anomaly thing to stick, so I got to explain the gap. The gap is explained by environmental
fine.
changes.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
what is the-
what is
maybe,
the
but-
lots of evidence other than a lot of assumptions?
It's
and a
all
lot
assumptions.
of maybes.
It's all. I mean, actually, can you cite me a single contemporary inscription from the date that the Sphinx is supposed to have been made that refers to the Sphinx?
I'm sorry. Say that
Can
again?
you cite a single contemporary inscription
Contemporary
from
to the
ancient
time.
contemporary to the date that Egyptologists ascribe to the Sphinx? In other words, to the reign of Khufu. Can you cite me a single inscription that talks about the Sphinx being built?
This is
Cut.
I don't study this area. I don't know.
Okay, well, you can't, because there is no such inscription.
Okay. Well, so.
Well, one would have thought there would be.
Well, maybe.
It's a giant project. It's 270 feet long. It's 70 feet high. It's carved out of solid rock. Nothing.
Okay, but you have
no
all
reference to
these
it
other-
at all in the Old Kingdom. You actually have to come down to the New Kingdom to get references to the Sphinx in inscriptions.
So, but you've already said that the pyramids were built at the time.
I feel like I'm taking the
I would
Nile.
say that a great deal of work was done
Sam
on the pyramids
Fisher
at the time of
case
2500 BC.
And we
I
ha-
think the ground plan was laid out earlier.
And we have like the step pyramid, which is cruder and not as well designed
Approach
as the other
with
pyramids.
this level.
That's a transitional stage at that time.
Often argued to be a transitional stage. Have
Yeah,
you've been to the step pyramid, I'm sure?
No, not.
Right, and you've been to Giza, though?
with
No, I've never
his
been to Giza.
Oh dear. Well,
What's
they
it
do make a
called?
very different impact.
Crash
I've
Site
climbed the Great
PA.
Pyramid 5 times,
Well,
and I mean, you're dealing with something orders of magnitude different in terms of what's required. I mean, this thing weighs 6 million
Oh, I
tons.
understand, but-
It's 481 feet high. It consists of 2.5 million individual blocks of stone. It's a line to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. I mean, to compare that to Zoser is really not a valid comparison at all. What's more interesting to me is the radical decline that takes place in pyramid building skills in the 5th and 6th dynasty. Go to Unas, go to Pepi, go to Teti at Saqqara. These are a shambles. You can hardly even recognize them as a pyramid. What happened to all that knowledge that's invested in the Great Pyramid? Why does Egypt devolve so rapidly? How do we explain this pristine, amazing work that's done on the Great Pyramid unless there's a legacy of knowledge being attached to it?
Okay, so
Did you see
every
simply
archaeologist,
tied my
Egypt
facility agent
archaeologist,
53?
Egyptologist knows everything
What a
you just
legend.
said.
They do.
And they don't
I
accept
use
any
mind
of your-
boosts on my
Why not?
53
That's why
too.
I'm needed.
He didn't
Because
even use
somebody's
mind
got to
I
boosts.
mean,
handle this.
is it just that they're
Legend,
closed-minded
man.
and they follow Zahi Abbas and they never think for themselves?
You want to see a
Or-
closed mind? I'll play you a 1.5-minute video of Zahi Awash
Okay,
refusing to
yeah,
debate
but,
with me.
But all of them?
We could probably get a
every one
PB
of
in
the
that.
Egyptologists
if we
and
fucking
archaeologists
just tried it
over
right
the
now.
last 2 centuries and so on, they're all dogmatically closed-minded and they can't see the arguments as clear as you? Or is it they're not convinced by your argument?
They're not convinced by my argument. They genuinely and absolutely believe that their argument is right. The notion that I'm proposing is apparently so preposterous to them that it isn't even worthy of consideration, but it is worthy of insults and attacks on me, on my integrity, on my decency as a human being, on my honesty. All of those things get attacked, you know, because mainstream, and that's fine, I'm ready for that. And by the way, I know that archaeologists, academics constantly attack each other all the time. I used to take this stuff personally, but then when I see what they do to each other, the ravaging attack dogs
Yeah.
are let loose on
Maybe I
any
just
new
won't
idea.
try
I
that
sometimes
strat right
wish
now.
scientists would actually look for what's good in a new idea rather than what's bad.
Oh,
but
well.
I get why they do
Yeah.
look for what's
Well,
bad.
But in other words, some young graduate student working in that area could make a name for himself by overturning,
My son was a young graduate
the
student at
fuck?
the University of Cardiff studying Egyptology. He got marked down in his degree because he proposed the possibility that the pyramids and the Sphinx might be or might have older origins. He was impressed by my work. It did him a lot of harm in his degree.
And if all this was true, then eventually
You haven't answered my
it
point.
would come
You haven't
out.
answered my point.
Which is
if
what?
you go against the mainstream view, your career does not progress as an Egyptologist.
I disagree. I mean,
Give me an example.
How is it that we know anything that we know about Egyptology
Give me an example
now?
from Egyptology of somebody who's gone against the mainstream view and been lauded for so doing.
Well, look, we don't believe everything about it that we believed 2 centuries ago, at, say, Napoleon's time, right? How did all that knowledge come about? How did all the change in that science
Well, it
develop?
really begins with Champollion and the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone. and
all right,
so
how was he able to do that against the mainstream?
There was no mainstream
All right, so
that he was
this is my-
against. There
this
was
is
no
my
mainstream. The
point.
mainstream has taken time to form, and it's very solid now.
I mean, scientists-
Egyptologists all sing
Oh,
from the
fuck
same hymn
off.
book. You'll find very little disagreement.
I guess I gotta
in
learn
every field, but somehow or another,
slow, though.
Einstein managed
Open
to
door.
make an impact because he turned out to be right.
Well, I'm no
It's-
Einstein, and I don't know if I'm right, but I'm going to continue to oppose that mainstream.
and-
Somebody
I
has
don't
to.
know. That's a valid comparison. Einstein and archaeology.
All right, well, take paleoanthropology. I mean, it's a completely different field now than a century ago. How did that happen if no one ever accepts new ideas? They do. It happens all the time.
Well, they're being forced
work,
to
but they
accept
do get
Göbekli
accepted.
Tepe, and that's a new idea. That, like, you know where you were talking about things taking a long time, and what seems like a long time to us is really a blink of the eye in terms of archaeology? We're in the middle of that. We're essentially in the middle of that with things like Göbekli Tepe, with Forbes publishing an article about the Younger Dryas possibly being impacted by comets and that being one of the causes of a mass extinction.
Right, and when
these are all mainstream ideas now.
And when
They
Alvarez
just gotta see up
proposed the
right
impact
there at that
hypothesis
door.
for the demise of the dinosaurs in 1980, it was ridiculed, but he turned out to be right, and then that became the accepted.
Right, it takes time.
Well, but what was the key
and
turning
now people are challenging that.
Wasn't the key turning point the finding of the crater? That's what made the difference.
Yeah,
It's
so
kind of hard to argue with
So
that.
again, where's your crater?
Well, this is where perhaps we need to bring in our phone a friend, you know, Malcolm Lecomte, one of the Younger Dryas impact scientists. I mean, the point being made is the following. Firstly, that the primary impacts were on ice. There may have been as many as 4 impacts that they were on the North American ice cap. Some craters have been suggested, for example, very deep holes in the Great Lakes. Other craters have been and will be looked at by the team in the coming months, whether it includes the Corosol crater, the Quebec terrain, and so on and so forth. There are candidates. The crater has not been found yet, but I would be surprised if a crater was easy to find when, the impact is on 2-mile deep ice. And, one of the biggest strewn fields in the world, which is the Australian tektite strewn field, there's no crater associated with that, but everybody accepts the impact proxies. There's enough of them to justify that. And that's what's going on around this impact hypothesis.
So a related question to that is not the lost civilization.
I mean, I could do widescreen, but...
megafaunal extinction of North American mammals. So this has been long debated before the impact hypothesis.
Switch to widescreen.
And the competing hypotheses were overhunting. Humans just hunted them to the point where, not every last one, to the point where the population numbers get too low and these species can't survive. Or climate change, or both. The climate change weakened the populations, then the humans came over and overhunted them. All right, so and then the impact hypothesis is proposed. Okay, so this was debated, and it didn't fare that well because there were a lot of mammals and other species that didn't go extinct that you would expect from a massive impact like that. It would have wiped out. Why the selected species, the kinds of species that humans would hunt, are the ones that went extinct, whereas these others didn't.
Well, why would humans be hunting the largest? There's no evidence that humans hunted the predators. There is evidence that they hunted woolly mammoths, but it's a very sparse. I mean, you have no more than a dozen sites that show association between human hunting and mammoths. And a lot of those, like the Lubbock Lake site, is now being questioned. What was previously interpreted as being butchering marks on the mammoth remains there are now being reinterpreted as possibly natural marks on the mammoth bones. But it's a big stretch to go from, okay, we've got a dozen sites where we have mammoth remains, and along with those mammoth remains, we find a few Clovis spear points. In 2 or 3 cases, we actually find, or they have found, spear
this is
gonna
take so long to get better than 53.
But it's a very large stretch to go from there to say that 10 or 12 million woolly mammoths, or 4 species of mammoths on 4 continents, were wiped out by Paleo-Indian hunters, probably in bands of no more than 2 or 3 dozen.
Have you ever been to a head smashed in buffalo site?
Yes, but that's a good example, because nowhere did that go anywhere close to exterminating the species of American bison.
But each site has its own particular explanation. Could be hunting, could be a massive flood, earthquake, whatever.
Could be a massive flood, yes, exactly. I think there you and I would be in complete agreement.
What does it mean by massive? There's global versus, local. So, for example, there's 52 mammalian genera went extinct in South America. Why would they go extinct in South America? About the time that humans were moving.
This is the run.
The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
This is the run.
There were impacts there. It does, and again, the dating of the migration of humans into South America is controversial at this point. There is evidence that humans were there long before. Paul Martin's idea of blitzkrieg requires that the animals be so stupid that they had no adaptive capabilities to the appearance of a new predatory species. But what is being demonstrated from examining the lifeways of the Paleo-Indian peoples is that they had very diversified diets, and they were hunter-gatherers. Now, why would they be choosing the largest, most dangerous animals to hunt when they
Why
had
am
such
I
a
so
proliferation of other
slow?
smaller
Like,
animals,
what?
we know that they were foraging, we know that they were eating seafood, there was and fishing, because all of this is being found in the camps. And then it certainly doesn't explain the extermination of, you know,
I'm so
the
slow.
cave bears, the short-faced bears, the camelops, the giant beavers, the giant armadillos, the American Pleistocene lion, the ground sloths that were the size of giraffes, 4 species of
Insane.
proboscideans, meaning mammoths, extinct on 4 continents. And to me, like, wait a second. We cannot invoke a modern example to say, well, here
How about
is
the Maori?
well, that's controversial also.
I mean, they drove the mallowbirds extinct in
Past eagle.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an assumption
Humans
there.
can-
That
humans
if
can-
you
Yeah,
ask
but
the
There's
Maori
a big difference
themselves,
between that and people with atlatls killing off all the saber-toothed tigers. But here's another answer to one of your questions. You were saying, like, why would some of the animals be alive? Well, we know that the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago didn't kill everything.
Right.
right?
And that is a massive impact, far bigger than anything we're talking about, and many, many animals survived that. So we don't know why things survive and why they don't. It could be proximity to the impact.
Right.
It could be that their food source wasn't removed. It could be that their predators were wiped out and they managed to survive. I mean, there's a lot of animals that are alive today in this continent. Like, for instance, a pronghorn antelope. Pronghorn antelope. Dan Flores, who's a wildlife historian, wrote an amazing book on it. And when he was talking about the American
off.
savanna during, like 15,000 plus years ago, there was all sorts of crazy animals millions of years ago that were like cheetahs that were running down animals at extreme speeds, which is the reason why pronghorn antelopes can run so much faster than
off,
any of their
man.
current predators. Something much faster than them was killing them, and that was wiped out, but they managed to make it. One of the reasons why they probably managed to make it is because their predators were wiped out. So it's not an even.
And
That's
another
right.
point, Michael, if it's overkill,
you, Trev.
it's intriguing that the overkill occurs, precisely in
That
the
was so
Everglades River, because
enraging,
I
man.
think you'd agree that now the whole story of the peopling of the Americas is pretty much up for grabs. I mean, Clovis first was the dominant model
Like,
for a very
so
long
what?
time, and under that model we're to envisage these Clovis hunters coming in across the Bering Land Bridge, going down the ice-free corridor, and then in like 800 years with their sophisticated fluted points they wipe out all the mammoths in North America. But now we know that humans have been coexisting and butchering mammoths, coexisting with mammoths for thousands of years before that, possibly tens of thousands of years before that.
You mean from evidence in Siberia?
I don't only mean from evidence in Siberia. I mean, I can cite you from Nature magazine just recently. Huge number. I don't think the Yukon is in Siberia, is it?
No.
I think the Yukon's in North America. Jacques Cinq-Mars, the excavator of the Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, back in the 1970s was proposing that human beings had been in the Americas at least 24,000 years ago. His reputation was utterly destroyed. His research funding was withdrawn. He was given no access to grants. He wasn't able to do his work. He was heavily penalized and punished by the community. And now, just a few weeks ago, we have the Smithsonian coming out and saying, sorry, we got it wrong. Jacques Cinq-Mars was right all along. And Tom Dillahay, with his work in Monteverde, the shit that he had to take, I think we're in a very interesting time. The peopling of the Americas is really a paradigm that has absolutely been overthrown. The notion of Clovis first. Well, you disagree with Smithsonian then, which is fine. I do too.
No, the Mesa Verde, it's an it's an anomaly. It's an isolated site. Where are all the sites between Clovis and Monteverde?
Do you honestly think
Clovis
Clovis was still first?
For thousands and thousands of years.
Come on, Michael. Do you think Clovis was still first?
Where are all the people between Clovis and Monteverde?
Not my problem.
It is your problem.
No, it's not my
one,
problem. They're there in Monteverde and they're there in North America.
Okay,
Go
so
figure.
I like what Seattle.
Go figure why
There's
a Denisovan trace in South American Indians
Who the
and
fuck
not in
am I?
North American
it's
Indians.
It's like the Nature paper I brought
Maybe
up
people
earlier,
crossed the ocean.
that there were Neanderthals or humans in San Diego 130,000 years ago. Okay, but when you look at that, okay, so they have mammoth bones. It looks like they might have been broken in the length, okay, and the tools, but they're not. Okay, the tools.
We're kind of changing subjects here, though.
Well, no.
You're trying to quibble the evidence of earlier human presence.
That's right.
You're trying to quibble it.
Well, not quibble.
Well,
just
you're quibbling
to
it. You're
challenge it.
you're quibbling it,
But
and you've
what
got
do
every
you- what
right
do
to
you
challenge
asking
it.
What are
why-
you saying very specifically that's opposing what he just said?
the reason archaeologists don't accept earlier than Clovis, say earlier than
do.
about 13,000,
They
14,000
do.
years.
It's massively accepted.
Like say Mesa Verde, for example.
Okay, I have to bring up an image. at this
Why don't
point.
they accept Mesa Verde?
They do accept Mesa Verde.
It
is accepted
Michael,
now.
are you sure about this?
As what, 24,000 years?
15 plus, possibly significantly.
Yeah. Okay. So
significantly
15,
older.
So 15 is kind of
Fuck
the
off.
downside of the window that humans came across the Bering Strait. That's possible. Not 24,000
Could you open
years.
Clovis first?
Not 130,000 years ago. Now, if it turns out that nature paper is right and that's confirmed, then that does
What the
overturn,
fuck? There's so much
the
fucking
Mason theory
lag.
for sure.
I
But
did
Why
not
would
mean
you-
to
this is
shoot
not
him
like
into
your
the
field of
back
study.
switch
Why would you
there.
argue
but-
against the nature
So
paper?
let's
okay, I'll just give you.
Let's quote the
don't.
Smithsonian.
I ask professionals. that study
Smithsonian,
this
slide
what they
number
think.
5. Today, decades later, the Clovis first model has collapsed. Okay, based on dozens of new studies, we now know that pre-Clovis peoples slaughtered mastodons in Washington state, dined on desert parsley in Oregon, made all-purpose stone tools that were Ice Age version of the
Yeah,
X-Acto
between
blade.
13,000 that's not.
No, look at this.
All
It says,
between
no,
that,
it says
Wow,
there's
insane.
24,000 years
It's like
down
I
at the
jump
bottom,
away.
Michael.
That was insane.
You know, are you saying the Smithsonian are wrong on this?
Michael, you're jumping to
Very
conclusions
probably.
before you even read that. You want to be right so badly you didn't read the part
This is
and
the
other
52.
animals there.
Look, I
No,
don't
hold
have
on a second. Confirming that humans
Like
had
what?
butchered
What?
horses
Like what
and
the
other
fuck?
animals there 24,000 years ago. It says it right there, and you are arguing against it without even reading it, which means you want to be right.
No.
No, that's absolutely
No,
what's going
because
on.
I have no dog in this fight.
Well, why didn't
I
you read
don't
that whole
care.
thing
I
before
don't
you
care.
started pointing at you being
You
correct?
published Skeptic magazine and you have no dog in the fight?
You're asking me why don't mainstream archaeologists accept
You should be skeptical of
dates
Clovis
in the
first.
tens of thousands? Okay, call it whatever you want. It goes back 11, 13,
But what do you think about
15.
what that says? That there's evidence they butchered horses 24,000 years ago.
Okay, I would have to check the site on it. I haven't seen this article.
Well, now that you have seen it,
Not my problem.
Okay,
now that
not
you
my
have
problem
seen it,
either.
but you
Well, it
said-
is your
but
problem
you were
because you're
saying
the
that there's
skeptic
no
and
evidence.
you're here opposing this and you're saying there's no evidence. You haven't even read the
I'm not
fucking article.
Okay, I'm not opposing anything. I'm saying
You certainly
this
are.
is the reason why scientists accept these dates here, because there's lots and lots of evidence for
That is scientists.
10,000, 11,000, 12,000.
That is
That is
science.
scientists.
Then you find one person that says
That is
24,000. Another
scientists.
one, like 2 weeks ago,
This is
that
not
says
one person. This
and-
is very
and then another
disappointing that you're
paper- no,
arguing this
hang on.
without really doing any research about
And
it.
then I
The
just-
article is
I
titled,
opened-
What
go.
Happens When an Archaeologist Challenges Mainstream Thinking?
And doesn't this-
that's
doesn't
in the
this-
Smithsonian in the month of March.
Okay,
Jacques Cinq-Mars, it was a brutal experience. Something that Cinq-Mars once likened to the Spanish Inquisition. At conferences, audiences paid little heed to his presentation, giving short shrift to the evidence, etc., etc., etc. The result was always the same. When he proposed that Bluefish Caves was 24,000 years old, it was not accepted. What the Smithsonian are saying is now, this is accepted. You need to get up to speed with the data, Michael.
Okay, my archaeology friends like Jared Diamond, who I just checked with on this, who's at UCLA.
Well,
the
he
big
certainly
expert,
has a dog in the fight.
And he, well, he just says, here's the problem. For 50 years, people propose pre-Clovis examples or sites or evidence. They never hold up. They always, the dating turned out to be incorrect. The carbon-14 was not calibrated right. There was this, there was that. They never hold up. It's
So
not
essentially, you're
Yeah, you
quoting a
quibbled it away
friend.
for 50 years.
Well,
You're quoting a friend who says the evidence hasn't held up before.
Yeah.
Instead of quoting these articles with these scientists who are talking about the data that's showing that human beings butchered horses 24,000 years ago, you're disputing it just because you talked to a friend.
I'm saying that that has to be confirmed. That particular
But
site.
why
that
argue
date-
against it?
I'm not arguing against
You
it.
certainly were.
No, I'm just saying that
Wasn't
this
he?
is this
Am
is
I
the-
wrong?
I feel you were arguing against it and saying that it's not the case and
I don't
quibbling
know.
it, and you
I
seem
don't
to
know.
be.
No,
if
no.
I'm correct, you seem to be a Clovis first advocate. But put your reputation on the line and say you
okay,
advocate Clovis
I'm
first.
not going to put a label on it. I'm going to say in the latest evidence that overwhelmingly shows humans coming across the Siberian Straits into North America 11, 12, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago.
That they definitely did then. They definitely did then.
And now what,
did they before?
What could push it back much earlier would be if they came by boat. Okay, so like where I live in Santa Barbara, there are sites on the Channel Islands that go back 11, 12,000 years ago. And they came by boat. Now the problem is, well, if they lived on the shores, which is where the good fishing and eating is, those are underwater. And
God.
short of doing good underwater archaeology, which is hard to do. In
Oh my God, this level.
We may never know.
It's one of my beefs with archaeology, actually, is that 10 million square miles of the planet that were above water during the Ice Age are underwater now, and marine archaeology is still mainly looking at shipwrecks, you know.
Well, okay. They do that because it's like where the light is.
Well, it leaves a big unanswered question.
God,
Anyway,
the fucking
for the
53
record,
is like
can I at least
really
say that you
good.
completely oppose the Smithsonian's position on this, that there has been no paradigm shift.
I will look at this. I haven't seen the Smithsonian thing. All right, I'm not aware of the horse find from 24,000 years ago. I am aware of the 130,000 year date from the Nature paper 2 weeks ago.
I have a slide on that too.
And if
I think the major
show the
speculation.
stone tools. They're nothing like Clovis points. It's just a big hand rock that might have been used. It might have been random.
Sorry, a big hand rock is
Yeah,
all
look-
there is before 13,000 years ago?
No, I'm talking about the 130,000-year-old
Oh,
site.
130,000
you're
year
talking
old
about
site.
the San Diego thing, yeah.
We don't need to talk about that.
Why?
That raises interesting questions. Was it Neanderthals? Was it Denisovans? Was it anatomically modern humans 130,000 years ago? It raises interesting
site?
questions.
Or
but-
is it a misinterpreted site because they aren't
but
stone
I'm
tools?
not
they're just
pinning.
rocks.
I'm not pinning anything to that. I'm saying yes. That report.
The question
that
is not
report was
necessarily
published in Nature.
just about the stone tools. It's about how the bones were shattered, and they believe the bones were shattered deliberately, indicating that someone was trying to get at the marrow.
Maybe.
Indicating,
Or-
yeah, maybe.
Or a tractor rolled over it, a couple of years ago.
No,
when it was excavated and broken that way.
no.
Well, that's
No
one of
one,
the-
no one had excavated. That's just speculation on your part.
Immediately,
No,
this
not my
find,
part. This was one of the.
immediately the
responses to
find
the
has
paper.
been quibbled by the archaeological mainstream. Of course, it's been published by the archaeological mainstream too, and the rest of the mainstream is quibbling it. And we will see how that
But I
plays
thought you
out.
said that can't happen.
We will say what can't happen.
That the mainstream won't allow, radical ideas. To
Nature
challenge
published it, and the idea is being quibbled.
And here the Smithsonian
Nature
publishes,
certainly
so
would not.
apparently it's okay.
Nature certainly would not have published it if the evidence were not strong. I accept that. Nature's
Hey,
not in the business
Trev.
of publishing,
I really fucking hate
fringy
you.
stuff. It is a radical proposal, but it's strong enough to justify.
Did he
publication
pass
in Nature.
away?
What's interesting to
How
me is that
could
the
he have
immediate
passed away?
reaction of the
Like,
archaeological community is not say,
what?
What could this mean? Let's look into the implications of this. I mean, if there were Neanderthals or Denisovans
too dumb.
in North America 130,000 years ago, we have a whole new scenario building here that really should interest everyone. Instead of the first reaction is let's destroy this because it's really annoying. Let's get rid of it. Let's prove it's wrong. Let's suggest that it was a fucking bulldozer or something like that. Maybe it was. I don't know. The work hasn't been done yet. But that instant sort of it's almost like an immune response to an idea that doesn't fit into the prevailing paradigm. But the other work, the work in South America, the Bluefish Caves work, that's really not controversial anymore. That's very widely accepted. Clovis first is a discredited and abandoned position. And I have something else to ask you, actually, concerning genetics and DNA. I'm sure you're well up on that. I mean, can you explain why we have a strong signal of Denisovan DNA in certain groups of South American Indians and in Australian Aborigines and Melanesians, but that Denisovan DNA doesn't crop up in North American Indians? How would we explain that if they all came through the Bering Strait?
I have no idea.
Well, it could be boats.
But I mean, this just happens to be something I don't know anything about.
Okay.
So part of the problem of even doing this is that...
Was your idea.
Well, here we are talking. This is good. But part of the risk is that you're going to find something I don't happen to know about. And then it's like, you see, I made my point. What point? Okay, so in like the history of the peopling of America, that area, there's always somebody that comes in with, it's, not Clovis, it's this, it's that, and rarely do they last. Why? The dates were miscalibrated or whatever. It's not just that scientists are closed-minded, although they can be. It's that the convergence of evidence isn't strong enough to overturn the mainstream theory. So, but it does happen. Maybe there are multiple migrations into North America and we just don't have all the sites. But when somebody comes up with a site like that's tens of thousands of years earlier than all the others that are accepted here, and it's over here, where are all the sites in between? It's like the gap, the 5,000-year gap with the Egyptian complex. Where are the sites? If it's true, they didn't fly there. So how'd they get there? Well, and there must be a trail, somewhere that we could find, unless they came by boat, and then that's evidence is gone.
Or unless you're dealing with 24,000 years ago, and there's not much evidence to find.
Maybe.
But if they came by boat, then that clearly implies they had navigational skills. They had the ability to build boats and find their way across the ocean. And
Big
well,
ocean, too.
you can do the coast. That's not quite as... you don't need a big ocean going.
But
You don't need an ocean going, but
I mean, this
there's
is one
also
hypothesis that that's proposed, is that they came across by boat, just following the shore.
The same area as the Bering Strait.
Yeah, you're just 100 feet offshore. You
Right.
go in and
Most likely both, right? And one of the issues, of course, was the short-faced bear was so formidable, according to Dan Flores, that it would have been a huge impediment for people crossing on foot anyway. And the short-faced bear went extinct right around the time we see more evidence of human beings entering in. But why did it go extinct? That's the big question.
Well, you have to add that to the list of predators that there would have been no reason for humans to have been hunting.
Yeah, well, that's an enormous animal.
So there's sort of two factors that go on here. There's positive evidence in favor of a hypothesis, then there's negative evidence against the mainstream hypothesis. And you really need both. So it's not enough to just say, I don't accept the evidence for here. Okay, that's fine. Scientists do that all the time.
What evidence? Well, let's speak in specifics, because you keep doing this. You keep saying, well, they find things, and it turns out, no, that's not true. And then you're essentially proving your point of being a skeptic without having any real cases. Well, you just keep saying this.
All of the cases we're talking about.
But no, you're not saying, you can't say all the cases. If you don't want to cite anything specifically, don't keep bringing up things that are refuted, because you don't have anything that you're pointing to. So you're just muddying the water.
Okay,
you're essentially pissing in the pool.
No, the Clovis thing, for example. Gobekli Tepe, the pyramids. All of these...
What's been disproved?
Okay, making a slightly different point.
That's the problem, is that you're not addressing the actual issues we're talking about. You muddy the water by saying things have been tossed out the window, so we have to be careful here and toss these things out the window as well.
Not toss out, just contemplate them, published in Nature, for example. So let's watch what happens to the 130,000-year-old hypothesis. If it holds up, and there's other sites that are dated that way, and so on and so forth, and that will be truly revolutionary, and scientists would accept it. They would.
You see, the problem is that when you have a very strong paradigm like Clovis first, which really dominates American archaeology.
Oh my god, I'm probably going to stop playing soon. I need to eat dinner.
It's difficult from a career point of view for archaeologists to come up and propose alternative sites. Those who did, like Tom Dillehay, like Jacques Cinq-Mars, paid a very heavy price for so doing. So the incentive to go looking for older stuff than Clovis is extremely low in the archaeological community as a result of this ferocious reaction that went on for 30 or 40 or even 50 years. Also consider the Valsequillo excavations in Mexico, where there was a suggestion of some sort of human presence 230,000 years ago. I mean, that good archaeology, but it was utterly dismissed, and the archaeologists involved were ruined for getting involved in that. It's hard to see how that's a profession that encourages people to think outside the box. When careers get ruined and research funding gets withdrawn for an idea that doesn't fit the current mainstream hypothesis.
Certainly we don't like to think that scientists do that. They do that. Are you familiar with Michael Cramo's book, Forbidden Archaeology?
I know Michael, yeah.
Okay. So now, and he makes, in my mind, as compelling a case as you do. And for his humans were here tens of millions of years ago. And his book is 900 pages long.
Tens of millions?
Yeah, tens of millions. Okay, and he's a Hindu, so his idea is this sort of long recycling and.
But what evidence is it based on for tens of millions of years?
I'm not here to defend Michael Cremo or to have a discussion about Michael Cremo. That's not why I'm sitting at this table.
I understand, but my point is that
Michael Cremo is not me.
That's right. So, but there's lots of alternative archaeology, which is where I began. There's lots of alternative archaeology books and
right. But what evidence is there that supports that?
None.
So why are you bringing up that when there's evidence that he's bringing up?
No, Cramo's evidence is similar to his. It's mostly negative evidence that I don't accept the date of this. There is this peculiar footprint-looking thing in the mud.
Cremo refers specifically to the knowledge filter. The most useful thing about that book is the publication of reports, archaeological reports, which are no longer available to the public, which do suggest an alternative point of view. I would say it's a very useful book to read. Beyond that, I have nothing to say about it.
Right. So
yeah, but that's not necessarily true. You're saying his only evidence. I mean, he's pointing to some pretty significant evidence. Like the Sphinx thing is a geologist from Boston University proposed this because of water erosion. Because of water erosion that could have only been done by thousands of years of rainfall, in his opinion, as a qualified geologist. Right. That's not a lack of evidence.
I understand, but why do no other geologists or archaeologists?
There are other. No,
well,
that's not true.
Actually, they do, and I've had multiple conversations with Robert where he has cited the fact that he has gotten considerable body of support from other geologists, not from Egyptologists, but from geologists who do recognize the effects of severe water erosion on limestone, carbonate rocks, and that's what we have there. We have a severe water erosion that appears and is preserved on the quarry walls around the Sphinx. The Sphinx itself, as Graham said, is difficult to ascertain because of all of the reconstruction that has gone on. But the quarry walls, which would have once had the very distinct stepped profile of a typical quarry, no longer have that. I mean, they have a textbook
I'll be right back. I'm using the
profile,
washroom, and then when I come
parabolic
back, I'm gonna
profile
decide if I'm
that
gonna
would be consistent with sheet
sign
flooding,
off or not.
which would
I'll
be
right
both
back. Thanks.
dissolution, because carbonate rocks dissolve in acidic waters, and what's called corrosion, which would be the effects of water loaded with sand sediment, which would make it very rough. So if you've got the sand sediment flowing over the edge of what would have been a quarry wall, what you're going to end up with is a smoothing off of the rough corners, and the final result would be a very rounded profile like you see there. And you would also see where the fissures in the rock would be selectively widened and opened by the water penetrating those fissures. I mean, it has all of the earmarks of a very textbook case of water erosion.
Don't you think it's very disingenuous comparing that to someone who thinks that human beings have been here for tens of millions of years with no evidence to support it whatsoever?
Well, he doesn't say, of course, he doesn't say he has no evidence. He has a 900-page book full of evidence. It's the quality of the evidence. When
What
you
about
say
the quality of that evidence?
it's okay. If it was that good, we're not geologists sitting here. If it was that good, why don't geologists look at it and go, he's right?
But they
Well,
do.
they do. That's
You're
the
not
point.
listening.
They do. They all do.
No,
Some
they don't
do.
all do.
Okay,
Some
why?
It's in
some geologists who work with Egyptologists say that shock is wrong.
Okay, we have a geologist on the line. Why don't we ask him? Mark.
Well, we can have one guy's opinion. We could also have other guys' opinions that we can get from
I mean,
other
this matter
sources.
has been
But
in the
what does that
public
have to do?
domain since 1992. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Shock's argument that we are looking at precipitation-induced weathering on the Sphinx has not been debunked. It has been opposed. It has been disagreed with. But that is different from saying it's debunked, and Shock stays solid and strong on that issue. He is a credentialed geologist. He is a professor of geology at the University of Boston. He has a right to speak out about this, and he's stated his view. I happen to find his view very interesting, especially since it correlates with what I regard as the interesting astronomy of the site. I think that site has origins that do go back into the Younger Dryas. That's my opinion. I've stated it many times, and I've presented the evidence that I think underwrites that
Yeah, I'm
opinion.
done
You and your colleagues are
for
absolutely
today.
at liberty to disagree, and
No
you do.
more.
You don't think it's disingenuous to compare that
No
to someone who
more.
says something that defies our current understanding of human
Fun,
beings
though.
and the
Thanks for
actual
hanging out.
evolution
Thanks
of
for
humans?
talking.
Okay.
But you're talking about someone who's
friends,
saying
my
that human
pals.
beings, how many millions of years old?
Check up on your
Tens of millions.
friends.
Well, we know for a fact, right? As far if you
Yep.
pay attention to evolution, right? But
Right.
that's we weren't
Well,
even
but-
humans
but,
a
Joe,
million years ago, correct?
I mean, there are creationists who think.
okay,
yeah,
but
all right.
we're not talking about them. We're talking about Graham Hancock.
I know. But my point was that, so here you have the mainstream scientists, and so it's like there's Graham, he seems so reasonable, but there's 50 like him, and each of them thinks that they're right. They're not.
There's your language. He seems so
Wow.
reasonable. So
Right.
you're right there. You're accusing me of dissimulation.
And you're
I
saying there's
seem reasonable,
50
but
like him.
the subtext is that I'm not, and then there's 50 like me.
This is more
What a
straw man.
patronizing, arrogant,
No, I don't mean it to-
deeply unpleasant and personal approach.
Graham, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to sound like that. I really don't.
Okay,
Okay, I have a larger point. That,
apology accepted.
Yeah, that when you're faced with a bunch of different alternative theories that are coming in, and it's not, it's like, take physics. I mean, every physicist, like you just had Lawrence Krauss, he gets these letters daily of people saying, I think I figured out why Einstein was wrong. And he can't address them all. And they're smart people, they're thoughtful people, they really believe it. What do you do with that? That's my point.
I feel that's not my problem. And if there are other alternative theories, that's not my problem either. It's a problem for the mainstream to sort it out and figure which to pay attention to and which not.
All right.
Well, I'm suspicious of the whole idea of the mainstream, because even looking in the mainstream, you find so many divergent points of view that I think that's basically a fiction, that there is this mainstream that has arrived at this